Phoenix Nights. Chapter 1229. The arrival of the human allied army was like a timely help to the Blue Brilliance Empire, which was in danger. These 300,000 people were the vanguard of the allied army, led by the top general of the Rio Empire, Sandro. Sandro had heard that the Blue Brilliance Empire was in danger, so he had rushed all the way and finally arrived at the most crucial moment. The main force of the vanguard was naturally the humans. Due to the speed of the march, most of them were lightly armed. Among the reinforcements, Rambus saw her most familiar ally, the elven princess Fierai. Fierai had brought 2 elven armies, magic rifles and magic archers. As for the elven mage army, they were part of the subsequent reinforcements. The destruction of the Silver Moon Immortal Capital and the fall of the Elven Queen and the Elven Prophet had brought great sorrow to the elves. This time, they were also determined to take revenge. However, not all the elves participated in this dangerous battle. The elven swordsmen remained in the Jinyao territory to protect the elven princess Michelle. This was also just in case, to preserve the elven bloodline. The new prophet, Chilanya, stayed by Michelle's side. It was not that Chilanya was afraid of death, but that she had received the inheritance of the elven prophet and needed to further understand and digest it. At the same time, as the leader of the new generation of elves, she was related to the safety of the entire elven race. She could not easily take risks. The orcs also stayed in the Jinyao territory. Strangely, the orcs respected the new elf prophet, Chilanya, from the bottom of their hearts. They listened to everything she said. This time, there was also a team of elven mages from the city of wizards, Yagda, in the army defending the Blue Brilliance Empire. Mage Terran had also sent out 2 elite human mage legions. As far as mages were concerned, they were second to none in terms of combat power. The mage armies were not made up of mages who had reached a certain number of mages. Instead, they were truly well-trained battlefield mages. These mages could use special mageweds or other methods to link everyone's mana and mental strength together to release the same spell. The power of the spell cast was far greater than the sum of ordinary people. Other than the elves, there was also an army of dwarves. In the early years, after the 3 major dwarven tribes of the forest, hill, and cave tribes merged, the Thick Earth Castle and the Black Rock Mountain Range within the borders of the Yanxiao Kingdom became the new stronghold of the dwarves. Therefore, when the Silver Moon Immortal City was destroyed, the dwarves who had already moved away were not affected. This time, the frontline army was led by the dwarf king Orfgar. The dragons did not send any reinforcements this time. After the short, decisive battle, in Jinyao territory, the dragons who participated in the battle seemed to have received an order from Dragon Emperor Palgoris and left Jinyao territory immediately to return to Ryuzaku. According to the latest intelligence, the Abyss army had started moving towards the imperial capital after destroying the Thorn Fortress. It was estimated that they would reach the eastern suburbs of Vestian within 5 to 6 hours. Rambus made a prompt decision. She ordered the reinforcements to quickly rest, eat, and recover their strength. She also took out a large amount of high-quality equipment from the armory and provided it to the reinforcements. At the same time, she quickly held a strategy meeting with the senior generals. The participants were Sandro, Altos, Phyllis, and others. On the tall city wall, all the soldiers were ready for battle. All kinds of magic protection inside and outside the city were also activated. The most serious test was about to come. The air was filled with a strange silence. Especially after knowing that those kingdoms and cities had been destroyed, the atmosphere was even more depressing. At this time, they could faintly hear the sound of galloping coming from afar. The ground was slightly shaking. Obviously, the army of the Abyss monsters was approaching. The soldiers clenched their weapons tightly. There was determination, nervousness, and fear in their eyes. No matter how well trained they were still living people. People would be afraid, but sometimes, they also had emotions and strength that surpass fear. The commander of the East Gate was Sandro, the representative of the young and strong army of the Rio Empire. He was known as the #1 general. Sandro felt the nervousness of the soldiers. He did not use a long speech to boost the morale of the soldiers. Instead, he took a spear from one of his bodyguards and tapped it on the ground. His pace was neither fast nor slow. The tapping sound was especially clear. Gradually, more and more people joined in the rhythm. Even the usually proud and calm elves were affected by the atmosphere and started tapping along with the rhythm. The tapping sound became more and more uniform and vigorous. The original depression was swept away and turned into excitement. It felt like everyone had gathered into a powerful torrent, as if they were invincible and invincible. Fight! 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 The soldiers roared loudly. The first elf Princess Phyllis and the dwarf King Olf could not help but look at Sandro in awe. He was indeed a famous human general. He used such a simple method to boost the morale of the soldiers. Everyone, prepare for battle! Sandro put down the spear and raised his long sword. The tapping sound of the weapon stopped immediately. At this time, the tremors on the ground became more and more clear. However, at this time, the soldiers' morale had already been ignited. They were no longer nervous and fearful. In the palace, Rambus sat alone on the throne in the main hall with a glass of wine in her hand. She heard the shouts of the soldiers in the distance. Looking at the wine trembling slightly, she said to herself, "It has begun." In the east of the city, a sea of red appeared in the sight of the defenders. Even the clouds in the sky seemed to be dyed red. The army of the abyss had finally arrived. Following Sandro's order, the catapults and the magic crystal cannons were launched at the same time. These were both long-range conventional weapons. Due to the cooldown problem, the magic crystal cannon stopped firing after one round. Only the fire meteors thrown by the catapults were still flying. As the terrain in the east of the Blue Glory Empire was extremely open and flat, the distribution of the abyss monsters was relatively scattered. The lethality of the catapults was not as good as that of the Thorn Fortress. Sandro did not order the Magic Rifle Legion to fire. According to the analysis of the previous intelligence, the defense of the abyss monsters was quite strong. If the distance was too far, the lethality of the magic rifle would be greatly reduced, and it would be a waste of ammunition. Seeing that the Crimson Wave was approaching, Sandro suddenly gave an unexpected order. "First Sorcerer Legion! Get ready!" The first Mage Legion was the Elven Legion of the City of Mages. The elves stood on top of the city wall and quickly chanted a joint magic. It was not a group attack magic such as Meteor Rain, but a relatively low-level earth magic called Earth Wall. The elves were extremely sensitive to elements, especially this kind of joint casting, which was far more powerful than ordinary single spells. Mounds rose up in front of them, and the mounds were getting higher and higher, connecting into a whole undulating earthen mountain. The terrain of the entire plain became hilly. This hilly terrain was quite exquisite. Not all the terrain became steep, but a few exits were deliberately left. Due to the little resistance before, the momentum of the army of the abyss was extremely fast. Under this sudden change, it was too late to react even if they wanted to, and they involuntarily rushed toward those exits. This meant that the entire scattered formation was concentrated together. At this moment, Sandro decisively ordered, "First Mage Legion, retreat! Magic Rifle, fire!" All the magic rifles shot out tongues of fire almost at the same time. Due to the sudden change in the terrain, the abyss monsters rushing out of the exits were quite dense, and it was convenient for the magic rifles to focus fire. The crevice demons at the front fell one after another without any suspense. There was still a difference in the shooting. The elven gunners were extremely accurate, and they often hit the crevice demons between their eyebrows with one shot, severely injuring them, or even killing them directly. Ordinary human gunners were obviously much inferior, but due to the terrain, they had eliminated a large number of abyss monsters in the blink of an eye. Princess Feli secretly praised Sandro's commanding ability. She was a top student of the Starlight Academy, and naturally could see that this tactic was quite successful. The earthen mountains created by the Mage Legion arrived at just the right time and distance, not only separating the formation of the abyss monsters from the front, but also allowing them to enter the effective range of their magic rifles. It was as if the Abyss monsters were actively cooperating to complete the task. The Abyss army continued to rush forward crazily, as if the casualties at the front had nothing to do with them. More and more monsters rushed out of the exits, and the attacks of the magic rifles began to disperse, and the lethality was obviously reduced. At the back, the violent demons also began to appear, and they shot bone spikes at the direction of the city wall. Due to the distance, they did not cause too much damage. However, the distance was rapidly closing. "Second Mage Legion, get ready!" Sandro's voice sounded again, and another row of mages neatly walked up the city wall. In the distance, a bone spike broke through the air, and was about to hit the mage. Just then, a steel shield appeared in time and blocked the bone spike. This was a large shield warrior of the dwarf race, and was best at defense. Sandro had arranged for them to protect the mages and archers on the city wall. Soon, the second Mage Legion had prepared a spell. It was also an earth element spell, but compared to the earthen wall, this spell was of a lower level, grease. The function of grease was to make the ground in an area extremely slippery, and it was difficult to stand on. With so many mages casting this spell together, the entire area under the city wall suddenly became a greasy pit. In a normal battle, grease was not lethal at all, and it was far inferior to quagmire, which could trap the enemy. However, in this environment, grease played a miraculous role. The Abyss monsters were already very fast, and under the influence of grease, they could not control their body balance. When their companions behind them pushed them, they swayed left and right, and a large number of them slipped and fell. Even the violent demons could not shoot their bone spikes normally. Seeing this opportunity, the magic gunners and archers fired continuously, and the Abyss monsters at the front were all annihilated by the fierce firepower. The morale of the soldiers was even higher. At this time, many cracks appeared on the earthen mountain that the elves had created. In the air, a female figure with flames all over her body appeared. As the flaming whip waved, the earthen mountain collapsed, revealing the abyss ocean behind it. Although they had used clever tactics to annihilate a large number of monsters, it was only a drop in the bucket for the entire Abyss army. The real test had just begun. Chapter 1230. Night fell. The Blue Brilliance Empire's capital, Vestian, didn't have the tranquility of the night. The sky was brightly lit, and various dazzling lights flashed from time to time amidst the roars. The battle on the west side of the capital had reached its climax. The sky and the ground were fighting fiercely without any regard for their own lives. The ground in front of the city wall was riddled with holes, and many places were permeated with high-temperature blood red. The magma-like blood red was formed by the melting bodies of the Abyss monsters. There were still many corpses that hadn't melted in time piled up like a mountain. Arrows and magic bullets rained down from the top of the city wall, constantly preventing the crevice demons and violent demons from approaching. Even so, the torrent of the Abyss continued to advance, and many monsters near the city wall had begun to climb. Casualties gradually appeared among the defenders. Most of them were injured by the bone spikes launched by the violent demons during the attack. The violent demons had 6 bone spikes. Although they could only be launched 6 times at most, there were too many of them. Under the intensive attack, even the big shield warriors of the dwarf tribe couldn't protect all of them. There were more and more abyss monsters near the city wall. Looking from afar, the blood-red sea was constantly hitting the city wall. The waves were stacked higher and higher, quickly approaching the top of the city wall. Sandro didn't panic. He gave an order to the first Mage Legion. The elf mages walked to the top of the city wall in an orderly manner, ignoring the monsters near them. They didn't dodge the flying bone spikes either. They began to quickly cast the magic that they had been preparing for a long time. A dwarf warrior next to an elf mage waved his shield half a beat too late, and the elf was nailed by the flying bone spikes. He fell to the ground dead. 2 other elves were attacked and fell off the city wall. They were instantly drowned by the monsters, but the rest of the elves weren't afraid. They cast the magic that Sandro ordered. Gravity spell! For a moment, all the monsters below the city wall, including the large area in front of it, slowed down. The monsters that were originally overlapping and climbing the city wall also fell down. But this wasn't the real purpose of gravity's spell. The sound of gears in the rear sounded one after another. The catapults that had long adjusted their angle and distance were launched together. At the same time, the magic crystal cannons that had been extinguished for a long time were also launched. The boulders thrown by the catapults weren't ignited like before. Instead, they were tied with a special magic bomb. This bomb was produced by the City of Mages, and it was partly made by the elves. There were no fuses or complicated magic triggers, but some kind of firing pin that could cause a powerful explosion under a violent impact. When Chinrui was traveling in Yagda, he was amazed when he saw this kind of bomb. It was very similar to the aerial bombs he knew in his previous life. Attracted by gravity, the catapult's projectiles accurately landed on the Abyss army in front of them. Boom, 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 boom. The ground of the entire imperial capital trembled violently. The cumulative power of the continuous explosions was far greater than that of a single explosion. Large swathes of empty space appeared among the originally densely packed monsters. The magic crystal cannons were aimed at the monsters at the bottom of the city wall. As the white light shone, the night sky was illuminated as if it was daytime. The blood-red torrent of the abyss turned into nothingness. At this time, arrows and magic rifles would also be affected by the gravity. The defenders on the city wall stopped attacking and hid in the parapet and other bunkers. The dwarven warriors formed a shield to protect the archers from the explosion. The effect of this tactic was quite obvious. The endless blood-red in front of the city wall turned into a large vacuum. The abyss monsters suffered a huge loss this time, but Sandro's expression did not relax. The defenders of the imperial capital had been holding on to the city wall. With the cooperation of various tactics, they had paid a very small price in exchange for a huge number of enemy casualties. If this was an ordinary battle, there was no doubt that it would be a glorious victory. However, this was not an ordinary battle. They were not facing an ordinary enemy now, but an almost endless number of monsters without fear. Although the battle was fruitful, the overall number of the Abyss army did not decrease significantly. After such a fierce battle, their stamina and energy were rapidly declining, especially the magic power of the mages. Even if Sandro deliberately arranged for them to take turns to rest, it could not keep up with the speed of consumption. If this battle continued for a long time, he was afraid that the effect of the gravity spell was about to end. Sandro took a deep breath and did not think anymore. He raised his long sword and ordered, "Adjust the angle of the catapult. Second Mage Legion, prepare your magic. Templar, clear the enemies approaching the imperial capital from the sky." The number of people participating in the battle in the sky was much fewer than on the ground, but the momentum was far greater than on the ground. The most conspicuous thing was the crisscrossing flames. These flames stayed in the air like ropes that did not disperse for a long time. These ropes were left by the mutated elite fiery sorceress, which had killed many Griffin Knights. The strength of an ordinary fiery sorceress was generally at the level of Demon Emperor, and a small number of mutated ones could reach the level of Demon Overlord. This fiery sorceress was a mutated elite who had entered the kingdomization stage. She had a special flame talent. When she used her talent, there would be a trail of flames wherever she passed. Many griffins could not change their direction in time and directly crashed into the flame wall. They turned into firebirds and fell together with the knights behind them. More than half of the Griffin Knight Legion had been lost, but they succeeded in attracting most of the enemy's air power to the sky, so the allies on the ground could not be affected. The mutated elite fiery sorceress who was slaughtering the Griffin Knights suddenly turned around. Her long whip flew to the back and entangled a rapier that was about to stab her. The rapier was held in the hands of a male elf. It was the super powerhouse of the elves, Pras. The fiery sorceress yelled, and the flames on her long whip grew stronger. The rapier in Pras' hand turned red under the high temperature. Pras groaned, but he still held the long sword tightly in his hand. His strength was originally on par with the fiery sorceress, but because he was good at the power of fire, the damage he could do to the fiery sorceress was greatly reduced, and he was firmly suppressed. If it weren't for the Griffin Knights who constantly disturbed the fiery sorceress with their javelins, Pras would have been seriously injured even if he was not dead. Looking at Pras, who was struggling, the fiery sorceress revealed a hideous smile. Suddenly she shook and her smile froze on her face. Her whole body began to freeze rapidly. In the blink of an eye, she had been frozen into an ice cube and fell down. Pras had rich battle experience. With a shake of his body, he intercepted the ice block in midair. He gathered all the power of the kingdom in his hand and punched the fiery sorceress, who had been frozen into an ice block, into pieces. KLSA, thanks? If you had come a little later, my soul would have gone to meet the moonlight goddess. Pras looked at his old friend in front of him, and sighed. Kale's strength was at the peak of the kingdom, 2 levels higher than Pras. However, judging from the wounds all over Kale's body, he had experienced a more dangerous battle. Take care of the Templars and Griffin Knights, KLSA panted. I'll go to Lady Tulsa and see if I can help. Tulsa was the only demigod elder left in the elves, and also one of the controllers of the Tower Forest. This time, she was protecting First Princess Feli Tavestian's city. Queen Liv was Tulsa's niece and also her disciple. The destruction of the fairy capital of Silver Moon infuriated Tulsa. If it weren't for Sandro and Feli's dissuasion, she would have killed her way into the army of the Abyss. The power of a demigod was undeniable. The reason why Sandro kept Tulsa alive was just in case. He didn't want her to waste her power prematurely. In fact, this consideration was correct. After eliminating the vanguard of the army of the Abyss, 2 terrifying elite lords of the Abyss appeared. Their strength had reached the demigod level. If it weren't for Tulsa, the city wall would have been broken. Tulsa's original intention was to drag the battle between the demigods into the army of the Abyss. She could use the aftermath of the battle to destroy the army of the Abyss. Unlike ordinary practitioners, the Lords of the Abyss did not have a kingdom or a territory, but their power was pure. These 2 elite Lords of the Abyss were far stronger than ordinary demigods. Under their joint attack, Tulsa was actually at a disadvantage. Moreover, the pressure from the army of the Abyss shocked even Tulsa. If she rashly rushed into the enemy's army, it was very likely that she would be engulfed by the endless waves. Similarly, this battlefield could not be dragged into the capital, so Tulsa made full use of the kiting tactic of a mage. She led the 2 lords of the Abyss into the air, spread out her kingdom, and trapped the 2 enemies in the middle. After KLSA joined in, the pressure on Tulsa was finally reduced a little, and she was basically able to maintain the stalemate. The fierce battle continued until dawn. Many cracks had appeared on the blood-stained city wall, and the ground under the city was covered with boiling magma. This night's battle was maintained at the highest intensity, and no one could remember how many abyssal creatures were killed or how many enemy attacks were defeated. Even with the geographical advantage and the cooperation of various tactics, the defenders still lost a third of their men. This showed how fierce the battle was. The bodies and minds of those who were still alive were in a state of extreme fatigue. They could only mechanically carry out the commander's orders, holding on with their last bit of courage. They were like a taut bow that could break at any time. The battle in the sky also continued, but the number of people on the side of the Ryo Empire was decreasing. What was terrifying was that the army of the Abyss did not show any signs of fatigue, and their numbers were still endless. This made the defenders feel despair. Her Majesty Rambis is here! Empress Lambis appeared in front of everyone with the Imperial Guards of the Imperial Palace in full armor. I will fight side by side with all of you, and we will live and die together! Rambai's simple words made the originally low morale rise again. Her Majesty did not escape like the other nobles, but stayed and vowed to fight to the death. Fight to the death! Fight to the death! The soldiers all raised their weapons. However, Sandro and the other generals knew that this was just to quench their thirst with poison. Their forces were almost at their limit, while the army of the Abyss was still unfathomable. More terrifyingly, a considerable part of the army of the Abyss had already bypassed the west gate of the imperial capital, crossed over the mountains and rivers that were originally natural barriers, and started to attack the other 3 gates where the army of the abyss was weaker. This showed that not only were the abyssal creatures powerful and fearless in battle, but they also had a considerable amount of intelligence. Rambus glanced at Princess Philly. The first elf princess's charming face was covered in blood, some of it from her companions, and some from her. However, compared to her arrogant self, she had become more mature and steady. Princess Philly knew what Rambus wanted to say. She looked at her companions who were fighting in blood and shook her head slightly. Rambus took a deep breath and nodded. A large number of inferno witches flew over from the sky, and the flood of monsters on the ground swept over again. A new wave of attack had begun, and it was even more ferocious than before. This is probably the last battle, many people said in their hearts, and they clenched their weapons tightly. Chapter 1231. Boom! It wasn't the city wall that collapsed first, but Tulsa's kingdom. The 2 strongest lords of the abyss were already too much for Tulsa to handle. Even with Kale's help, they were barely on par with each other. Kale's strength couldn't withstand a blow from the Lord of the Abyss. He would be turned into ashes if he was touched by the giant's sword. He could only use Tulsa's kingdom to fight with all kinds of magic skills. It was already his limit to hold on until now. In many cases, quantity couldn't replace quality. If it weren't for the 2 elite lords of the Abyss, Tulsa wouldn't be afraid even if there were double the number of fiery witches. However, they were now exhausted and on the verge of death. The abyssal army launched another wave of attacks. A large number of fiery witches swarmed over from the sky. The crazy attacks of the fiery witches, regardless of the casualties, were the last straw that broke the camel's back. 2 sharp sword lights flashed, and Tulsa's kingdom finally couldn't hold on anymore. It was torn apart. All she could do was use the last of her strength to condense a high-intensity wind blade the moment the kingdom collapsed, and cut off the arm of the Lord of the Abyss that was charging at Kale. However, the Lord of the Abyss was extremely strong. Although it lost its arm, it didn't stop attacking. It cut Kale, who had lost the protection of the kingdom, into 2 halves. The sword carried a horrifying sharpness. The body of the peak of Kale's kingdom couldn't resist it at all. The 2 halves were instantly torn into pieces by the sharp wind and disappeared without a trace. Tulsa was furious. However, her kingdom collapsed, and even the last bit of power was used up. She couldn't help it at all. What made her even more desperate was that she sensed a dangerous demigod-level aura in the sky and on the ground again. There should be a new elite lord of the abyss. The attack of the fiery witches not only destroyed Tulsa's kingdom, but also all the resistance in the Blue Brilliance Empire. The Griffin Knights and Church Templars were almost all killed or injured. The situation on the ground was also critical. The magic gunners and archers who lost nearly half of their firepower were obviously weakened. They couldn't stop the crazy Abyss army. The magic power of the mages had long been used up. Even if Sandro had great commanding skills, he couldn't turn the situation around in the face of such an absolute difference in strength. Wave upon wave of abyssal monsters quickly approached the city wall and began to climb. The enchantment of the city wall had already been completely destroyed. Many powerful abyssal monsters stepped on the bodies of their companions and directly jumped up the city wall, killing a large number of archers and gunners. The dwarven warriors with large shields displayed their powerful close combat ability. The monsters that rushed up the city wall were either knocked down or chopped into pieces by the axes. The bravest one was the dwarf king, Orpheus. He was like a meat grinder, turning the nearby abyssal monsters into pieces. Rambus and Phyllis also personally went into battle under the protection of their personal guards to boost morale. However, as more and more monsters climbed to the top of the city wall, the defenders suffered more and more casualties in the fierce close combat. The situation quickly became one-sided, and the entire city wall seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The golden sword in Rambus's hand glowed with blue waves. As she waved it, the abyssal monsters in a fan-shaped area were all wiped out. As an emperor who dealt with thousands of affairs every day, she hadn't fought such a high-intensity battle for a long time. This sword consumed a lot of strength. Just when she was about to reach her limit, she suddenly felt a sense of danger. The last female guard beside her suddenly rushed up and blocked in front of Rambus. Two flying bone spikes pierced through the young girl's chest and abdomen. The crevice demons behind her rushed up and threw her to the ground. Tears appeared in Rambus's eyes. She gritted her teeth and swept her sword again. A storm-like power shot out. The female guard and the crevice demons behind her were torn apart by this sword. However, her whole body was on the verge of collapse, and she had no strength to swing her sword again. She didn't retreat because the others were fighting with their lives on the line. In the current situation, even if she retreated, the result would be the same. Less than half an hour had passed since Rambus arrived at the top of the city wall. She couldn't hold on anymore. It was hard to imagine that the soldiers had fought with these monsters for a whole night. Now that the situation was hopeless, the only choice they had was to fight to the death. At least, as an emperor, she didn't choose to run away cowardly. Life choices couldn't be reversed. Just like when she chose to make a deal with that man. If she had chosen the other way, would he have appeared today regardless of everything, just like how she faced everyone at the Holy Mountain and faced the Supreme Angel to save the woman imprisoned by the church? Deep in her heart, she envied that woman. However, life couldn't be repeated, and choices couldn't be made. Since she had made her choice, she couldn't regret it. If she had chosen him back then, she would have followed him without hesitation, no matter if it was the demon realm, the rebellion, or losing everything. The truth was that she had chosen the throne. Even if she was alone, even if she was facing death, she would continue to walk down this path. This was her, Rambus looking at the sky that was covered by blood clouds and flames. Rambus calmed down even though she felt death approaching like never before. Suddenly, Rambus felt the light in the sky dimming. Was this the feeling of death approaching? No. It was a dark cloud. Giant dragons. Rambus finally realized what was happening. She was energized. The dragon's reinforcements. The Ryuzuku had finally sent out reinforcements. Hundreds of giant dragons appeared in the sky. They all breathed dragon breath at the fiery sorceresses, stopping the fiery sorceresses' ferocious charge. A figure appeared in front of the elf elder Tulsa at the speed of lightning. He grabbed the giant sword that was slashing at her with his bare hands, allowing Tulsa to escape the fate of being cut in half at the waist. It was a young man in silver light armor. His face was cold and stern, and his facial features were chiseled. Groas! Tulsa had already recognized this man. He was the elder of the Ryuzuku. His ability had reached the middle stage of the demigod level. However, Groas had grabbed the blade in a hurry. He did not have enough time to use his full strength, and blood seeped out of his palm. If it were not for the fact that he was a saint dragon with an extremely tough body, his palm would have been broken. Groas's reaction was extremely fast. Before the Lord of the Abyss could exert its strength again, he quickly punched the Lord of the Abyss' chest. This punch contained the powerful strength of the middle stage of the demigod level. A hole appeared in the Lord of the Abyss' chest, and its entire body was crushed. After eliminating the Lord of the Abyss, Groas moved. His hands turned into countless afterimages, and under the ferocious attack, the other Lord of the Abyss who had lost an arm also followed in its companion's footsteps. Watch out! Tulsa's voice rang out, and at the same time, Groas felt a sense of danger in his heart. His figure flashed, and he disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, the silver armor on his chest had already cracked open, and traces of blood could be vaguely seen. 3 more elite lords of the Abyss appeared in front of him. One of them was a middle-stage demigod, and the other 2 were beginner-stage demigods. These 4 lords of the Abyss were new reinforcements that had arrived later. Their strength was incomparable to the 2 lords of the Abyss who had fought for a whole night. Groas's heart skipped a beat. He flew down to the battlefield below, and the 3 lords of the Abyss followed closely. More and more inferno witches swarmed in from the sky. The dragons could not hold their breaths any longer. At this moment, Tulsa suddenly heard a strange roar. It sounded like some kind of mechanical sound. She turned around and saw a black mass behind her. They were huge and glowed with a metallic light. They were flying in the sky in an orderly manner, and their formation was like a huge moving castle. Construct war dolls? Tulsa, who was secretly protecting the elf princess, had seen such a huge war machine in the Jianyao territory. She did not expect to see it here. That's right, they are the army of the demon realm. She remembered that the demons had released thousands of war dolls, which had already caused panic among the human allied forces. However, the number of war dolls in front of her was at least tens of thousands. Is this the true power of the demon realm? If she had sent out these construct war dolls in the Jianyao territory at that time, just as she thought of this, the dragons had already retreated, and the construct war dolls immediately attacked the Inferno Witches. Their attack method was similar to that in the magic game. First, it was some kind of long-range missile. The missile's power was quite amazing. After hitting the Inferno Witches, there was a violent explosion. Even the body of a demon emperor could not withstand it, and several companions nearby were instantly blown into pieces. The formation of the construct war dolls was very particular. They could be divided into 3 groups to take turns to fire. The whole sky was shaking. The flames and bloody light quickly faded in the strong tremors and smoke. The power of this group attack made Tulsa secretly speechless. Even a national-level powerhouse would probably be smashed into pieces under such a fierce bombardment. She then shifted her attention to the battle between Groaz and the 3 lords of the abyss below. Groaz did not fight head-on. Instead, he kept evading in a roundabout way, as if he could avoid a head-on battle. When the 3 lords of the abyss were chasing after him, one of them suddenly shook and was hit by a bolt of lightning that appeared out of nowhere. This bolt of lightning was extremely powerful, and even Dulce, who was proficient in wind magic, had to admit that she was inferior to it. The abyssal lord that was struck by the bolt of lightning was charred black, and it plummeted from the sky. Before it even had a chance to land on the ground, it was struck by a series of bolts of lightning, and it crashed heavily into the abyssal army on the ground. Then, a dark cloud condensed by energy appeared in the sky. The dark cloud poured out countless bolts of lightning, and all the abyssal creatures within the range were turned into charcoal. The ground was melted and solidified. The body of the Lord of the Abyss finally disappeared in the lightning. Tulsa looked at the huge figure that killed the beginner-stage demigod Lord of the Abyss with super-strong lightning power in surprise. She blurted out, "Titan! And it's a demigod-level Titan!" With her experience, she naturally knew that such giants existed on the Island of Storms, but she had never heard of a demigod-level Titan. She could not imagine that the Titan giants, who had always been unapproachable, would actually come to support the Ryo Empire. Was it because of the dragons, or because of the realm of demons? The next moment, countless bolts of lightning flashed at the same time, mixed with balls of roaring storms. The source was the neatly lined-up Titan giants. There were at least 1,000 of them. The Titan giants' talent in lightning and storms was amazing. It was like thousands of magic crystal cannons firing at the same time. The surging abyss army was instantly split apart, and a large area was instantly emptied. The blood red that had already surged to the top of the city was also replaced by pieces of crystal. Upon closer inspection, they were magical beasts the size of water buffaloes. Their bodies were crystal clear, as if they were made of crystal. The ferocity of these magical beasts was no less than the abyssal monsters. The monsters that had invaded the top of the city and inside the city were instantly wiped out. This scene stunned Rambus. She subconsciously turned around and saw an endless stretch of crystal behind her. There were also many huge figures and blue women wearing veils floating in the air. It turned out that the real main force of the reinforcements was not the dragons, but this powerful army that she had never seen before. Chapter 1232. Night fell again. In the capital of the Blue Brilliance Empire. The blood-red sky during the day had gradually recovered, and the shock that lasted for 2 days and 1 night had also returned to peace. All the corpses had been cleaned up, but the air was still filled with the pungent smell of blood. The city wall on the west side had been ruined, and the land outside the city wall was full of scars. The overall height seemed to have dropped by several meters, which showed how fierce the battle had been. The ground was covered with solidified dark red rocks, which looked like cooled magma. There were also many strange transparent things, which looked like some kind of crystal. Rambus stood on the broken city wall, staring at the lights in the capital, which were like stars illuminating the darkness. She had almost lost sight of the lights. She had almost lost sight of them. She had almost lost them from this world. Fortunately, the army of the Abyss had been completely annihilated. It was a total annihilation. In the battle, in addition to the dragons and the strange army, the reinforcements of the Church of Light had also arrived. This time, 2 legions were sent. One was the Temple Knights of the Tsung Thunder Temple, led by Pari, who was once known as the Sword Saint of Gale. Now, Pari was already a super strong person. The other was the Priest Legion, which mainly consisted of light magicians, led by Miranda, the disciple of Saint Eudora. However, what really changed the situation of the battle was that large number of strange troops of unknown origin. The monsters of the Abyss were not like ordinary soldiers. When the situation was lost or the leader died, their morale would plummet, and they would even collapse without fighting. Even if there was only one monster left, they still rushed forward fearlessly, which was the most frightening thing. Only those who had experienced it themselves knew how terrible it was. After the reinforcements arrived, the army of the Abyss launched an even more terrible charge, but they were finally defeated by those strange troops. Of course, that army also paid a considerable price. At this time, Artos walked in front of Rambus and whispered a few words. Lambis was surprised. She nodded and said, "Invite him over." Not long after, a man came to Lambis and bowed. "Greetings, Your Majesty. If I remember correctly, I've met you once in the Templar. Your name is Lucio, and you're the external steward of the Templar. I think you were recommended by Bonnet." Lucio was a little surprised. "What an honor! I didn't expect a nobody like me to be remembered by His Majesty." "Nobody?" Rambus shook her head and smiled bitterly. "You must be joking, Lord Lucio. I should be the one feeling ashamed. There's a spy from another world right under my nose, yet I didn't know anything. When Artos told me that the army that saved the capital was from the demons, I was shocked." Lucio had indeed made a great contribution this time. If it were not for him leading the way, the alchemy army would not have reached the Ryo Empire so quickly. On the way, they coincidentally met Ryuzuka's reinforcements. Groas and Chunrei got to know each other through a fight on the Island of Storms. He and the leader of the Titans, Oshalos, could be considered old acquaintances. It was a good opportunity for them to join forces. "Your Majesty, you think too highly of me. I am indeed a small fry. I am merely following Master's orders to guide this ancient army to support us." "Your Majesty? Which Empress of the Demon Realm?" Rambus frowned. Only a huge empire could have such a powerful army. From this, it could be seen that the combat power of the Demon Realm was far beyond their expectations. Fortunately, the battle in the Jinyao territory did not continue. Speaking of this topic, Lucio's eyes were filled with pride. He said, "My master is not the Empress of the Demon Realm. Well, let me put it this way. The 3 empresses are all his wives. His Highness Aguile?" Rambus was taken aback. She was no stranger to the basic situation of the Demon Realm. However, this time, the news was delayed. After the battle in the Jinyao territory, the intelligence department of the Ryo Empire immediately received the relevant news. However, due to Rambis's consistent request, the intelligence department did not rush to report it. Instead, after repeated verification and confirmation, they finally confirmed that Aguile was the Prince Arthur who died in the Holy Son's canonization hall. At that time, the witnesses were all heads of states, and they were ordered to keep quiet by the church. When the confirmed information appeared on Rambis's table, all Rambis's energy had been focused on the newly appeared abyss monsters. With the urgency of the war, Rambis had no time to deal with other affairs. After all, This was a major event related to the survival of the entire Ryo Empire. In fact, Aguile is just an alias. Master is also an old friend of His Majesty, old friend. Rambus suddenly thought of a certain scene at the New Moon Festival and the demons that were seen through by Raphael. She had a faint premonition in her heart. His Majesty should still remember the Holy Grail. Lucio's words confirmed the assumption in Rambise's heart. She couldn't help but be shocked. You mean Aguile is him? The only husband of the 3 empresses of the demon realm, the real master behind the demon realm, is actually the man who almost became my husband. The 3rd prince of the Long Huang Empire whom I resolutely gave up for the sake of power. Rambus had an inexplicable bitter feeling. With that man's power and character, his marriage with the 3 empresses of the demon realm should be more than just a relationship of interest. Why were those women able to have power and love at the same time? At the moment when she thought she was facing death, she was still unprecedentedly determined. Now that she was alive again, some things that she thought she had let go emerged in her heart again. She was an empress, after all, she was also a woman. But now that things had come to this, these thoughts were meaningless. Rambus withdrew her thoughts and sighed. This is a secret, but since you can tell me, I believe a lot of people already know. Master revealed his identity in front of His Majesty Rex of the Long Huang Empire in the Jinyao territory, and stopped the war between the 2 sides. Rambus thought that Gabriel and Raphael actually had to join forces to compete with Arthur in the immortal capital of Silver Moon, and she couldn't help but nod. It's no wonder. With the strength he has now, he doesn't have to fear anyone anymore. Sir Lucio, please convey my most sincere thanks to Her Highness for your help. Everyone knew about the marriage storm between Arthur and Princess Mingzhu, and Lucio naturally understood it. He didn't know if his master had any unknown entanglements with this empress, so he didn't dare to hold back and bowed deeply. Sandro came over with a man and a woman beside him. They were the representatives of the Holy Mountain of Light's reinforcements this time, Pari and Miranda. Rambus bowed slightly to the 2. Sir Pari, Miss Miranda, it's all thanks to you this time. Pari shook his head and let out a long sigh. His Majesty's words make us feel ashamed. We seriously underestimated the power of the Abyss, and indeed didn't play much of a role. As long as His Highness doesn't mind us being in the way, it's fine. The Temple Knights had a certain restraining effect on the Abyss, but their numbers were not even enough to fill the gaps between the teeth of the entire Abyss army. Instead, it was the Priest Legion that played a miraculous role in healing the wounded soldiers. Lucio was just the most miserable mercenary in the past, and he never thought that one day he would talk to big shots like Pari and Rambus like this. But now he was representing Chenrui, not himself, so his back was obviously much stiffer. He just smiled at Pari, neither servile nor overbearing, and said, You flatter me, sir. I'm just following orders. Rambus nodded. No matter which side I'm on, I'll remember this favor and will definitely repay it in the future. You don't have to be so polite, Your Majesty. Pari sighed. Here's a piece of bad news. While we were fighting hard against the Abyss, the other 2 Abyss armies had already destroyed Kansas City and Shangmit City, and have now invaded the Lubo Kingdom. According to the analysis of the intelligence, the number of the Abyss armies is no less than the one we just faced. What? Rambus was shocked. The Abyss army was actually divided into 3 groups. It was laughable that she originally thought that the main force of the Abyss had been defeated. Kansas City and Shangmit City were cities in the northwest of the Ryo Empire, and the entire Ryo Empire had been destroyed by more than half. Miranda spoke up. In the battle just now, we've already witnessed Your Majesty's bravery, but now is indeed not the time to show off. The number of Abyss armies is far greater than we imagined, and I suggest that Your Majesty quickly prepare to retreat from Vestian. Not only for yourself, but also for the people of the capital. Rambus fell silent. She understood that Passari's words were actually very tactful. In the battle just now, almost all of Vestian's defenses and strength had been destroyed. If there was another attack like that, even with the help of the demon army, they would not be able to defend. However, if she retreated this time, the entire Ryo Empire would basically be destroyed. The Abyss monsters are too strong, and the strength of a country alone is no longer enough to fight against them, Pari said. The only thing we can do now is to organize the people to retreat to the west of the continent as soon as possible, and then unite all of our forces to fight the Abyss to the death. As far as I know, White Cliff is also actively trying to destroy the Abyss army's nest and get rid of these monsters from the root, but we can no longer wait like this. Somewhat surprised by Pasari's choice of words, Rambus asked. We? This time, my and Miranda's mission is to protect your majesty before we completely defeat the Abyss. Before the mission is completed, we cannot return. Pari smiled bitterly. To put it bluntly, we're just cannon fodder that was excluded and sent here to die. Rambus had also heard of the open and veiled strife between the three heads of the Holy Mountain of Light, so she did not ask further. Her mind seemed to recall Aduza's words in the hall. As long as your majesty is alive, so is the Empire. Finally, she made up her mind. Then, let's retreat. Nightmare Volcano. In the sky where the diamond was located, several rays of blood-red light shone down, reflecting the surging torrent of flames on the ground. Quiriana sat on a blood-red throne, wearing a white robe, her eyes slightly closed. In the magma below this hillside were endless blood cocoons, and there were many abyssal hives that had already taken shape, constantly creating new blood cocoons. Among them, 2 huge blood cocoons were the most conspicuous, and countless crystal-clear abyssal flowers were condensed near these 2 huge blood cocoons, and there were many flowers floating around the magma. Quiriana's eyes slowly opened, and there was still a trace of a crack in her right eye. The huge blood cocoon on the left began to shake, and the outer layer began to peel off. Chapter 1233. Demon Realm, Dark Moon Residence. In the Super System. We lost 2/3 of the army? Shinrei frowned slightly when he received the loss report of the ancient alchemy civilization army from Crystal Phoenix of the City of Stars for the first time. The ancient army sent this time was about 10% of the forces that the City of Stars could fight, excluding the gremlins. Their combat power was already quite strong. Especially the Titan Legion led by Oceolus, which was a quarter of the total number of Titans in the Island of Storms and the Demon Realm. This time, the Titans also lost 300, which showed the intensity of the battle. The rescue this time was also a test. The soldiers of the ancient alchemy civilization were much stronger than ordinary demons or humans. Moreover, there was Crystal Phoenix, the control center that could not be violated. Although the soldiers had the corresponding wisdom and consciousness, they would not be routed like ordinary troops. The Abyss was the same, but most of the monsters in the Abyss only had combat instincts, and no independent consciousness. In contrast, the creatures of the ancient alchemy civilization had more human nature, and the fluctuations of their combat power were also larger. In terms of the current strength of the two armies, the difference was not big, but don't forget that the ancient alchemy civilization was destroyed by the Abyss. Judging from the last words left by the mad scientist, Skywheel, the 4 ancient alchemy empires did not pay enough attention to the Abyss at that time. They were still waging civil war when the Abyss invaded. When they realized it, it was too late to regret. However, this was only from the perspective of the ancient alchemy civilization. Shinrei could analyze the terrifying strength of Quiriana that he had personally experienced, and the contact battle of the alchemy creatures in the Blue Brilliance Empire. Even if the ancient alchemy civilization went all out, they were not the opponent of the Abyss. Not only the high-end combat power of the 3 masters of the Abyss, but the same was true for the abyssal creatures below. In terms of quality, the combat power of the ancient alchemy creatures in the level 5 and level 6 alchemy civilizations was not far from the abyssal creatures, but the biggest difference was the quantity. Due to Garadam's successful research on the Rule Energy Body, the performance of the City of Stars had been further improved. Although it had not reached the capital of a real level 6 civilization, the total amount of the alchemy army at Shinrei's hands had now exceeded the average level 5 civilization. There were 6 million gremlin servants, 3,000,000 crystal beasts 1.5 million lamp spirits, 300,000 assemble puppets, 30,000 giant crystal beasts, and 5,000 titans. Under the premise of sufficient rule-bending energy, the success rate of super-evolution was also increasing, and there were more and more super creatures. It could be said that the military force that Chenrei had at hand was already extremely terrifying, and he could unify the devil world and the human world with just his military force. However, in the face of the abyss, it was far from enough. Even if it became the capital of the ancient alchemy civilization, there was still a strict upper limit on the creatures that could be produced and controlled. Back then, the ancient alchemy civilization had the capital of the 4 universal civilizations, but it was still destroyed by the abyss. The number of the abyss could only be summed up in 2 words: endless. The destruction of countless planes had proven this point. The number of troops attacking the Ryo Empire was just a drop in the bucket. Even if Chenrei were to personally attack and eliminate those small fries, it would only be a waste of time and energy. There was only one way to completely destroy the power of the abyss, and that was to destroy the source. In other words, get rid of the 3 lords, and that eye. At present, this was still a rather distant goal. In the last battle at the Silver Moon Immortal Capital, the 3 supreme angels, Rala and Chenrei, were almost annihilated even when they teamed up. With such a gap in strength, it was useless even with Satan and the others. However, if he did not try, impossible would never become possible. Fortunately, Quiriana was injured, and the other 2 Abyss Lords were nowhere to be seen. He must use this precious time to recover and enhance his strength as soon as possible. Perhaps this was the last chance. In order to resist the abyss, humans, demons, and the power of the ancient alchemy civilization in his hands must unite. What puzzled Chenrei was that the elemental king, Satan, and Ben Hong once called the abyss a cursed thing. What is this curse? From the conversation between the veteran powerhouses of the Peak countries and Quiriana, it could be seen that the combat strength of the main plane should have been the strongest. For example, the 3 supreme angels all had combat strength of SSS+++. The other cultivators' strength was also generally far beyond the current situation. But now, the 3 supreme angels were easily defeated by Quiriana even when they teamed up. There should only be one reason for such a huge difference in strength: the gods. Quiriana referred to the 3 supreme angels as servants who lost their master's protection, and stray dogs. In that case, the reason why Michael and the entire mortal plane were weakened was because they lost their divine protection. In other words, the increase in divine power was due to them losing their divine protection. The reason for the god's death was probably because Lucifer had used the supreme key to open that eye in the void. And in Chenrei's dream, that blood-red eye was formed from some existence that was besieged by a galaxy. The galaxy was likely the gods. In that case, what was the existence that transformed into the eye? What did it have to do with the abyss? Chenrei felt a little confused. But in the current situation, the most important thing was how to resist the attack of the abyss and reduce the loss of life, which also meant reducing the recovery speed of the abyss. Chenrei came back to his senses. Looking at the people in the Galaxy Divinity Temple who had their eyes closed and were surrounded by the power of constellations, he didn't think anymore. He also closed his eyes and merged into the vast galaxy. Holy Mountain of Light. An emergency meeting was also held. The meeting was hosted by the 3 leaders, Pope Fendis, Saintess Eudora, and Patriarch Pusmer. The 3 Grand Cardinals, Judge Seuss, and the current Temple Master of the Tsang Thunder Temple, Gamundan, all participated in this meeting. It could be said that this was the highest meeting of the leaders below the super level of the Holy Mountain of Light. I just received the information from the capital of the Blue Glory Empire. Rambus finally destroyed the invading army of the Abyss. Now she is organizing the army and civilians to evacuate to the west. The kingdom of Lubo is in danger. Fendis glanced at Eudora. What do you think, Your Holiness Eudora? Fendis was old, and he wouldn't be the Pope of Light for long. Eudora, who was on the side of Raphael, had now become the most powerful magnate in the Holy Mountain of Light. She was almost the next pope. According to the agreement between Michael and the other two, if one could become the pope, one of them would get more faith. As for the open and secret fights below, it was simply a fight between ants in the secular world, which was insignificant. What was more, the focus of the three supreme angels was on the abyss. After returning to the White Cliff, they immediately began to heal their wounds and prepare to deal with Quiriana. For such a trivial matter as changing the position of the Pope, they only said, "Decide by yourself." Fendes asked for Eudora's opinion as soon as he came up. His intention was self-evident. Eudora looked at everyone and said confidently, "There are two things that must be done. First, the withdrawal of the church personnel to the west. The churches in the Rio Empire, the Iron Gate Kingdom and other places have been destroyed. The clergy and believers have suffered heavy losses. The power of the church must be transferred to a safe area as soon as possible. The second thing is to unite the amazing Royal Highness of the Demon Realm. I believe everyone knows his identity. At present, he is already in equal existence with Michael and Sir Raphael. He has formed an alliance with the three supreme angels in the Jin Yao territory. As far as I know, the special army from the Demon Realm played a key role in the Blue Glory Empire's defense against the Abyss this time. Although the other party is the Demon Realm, in the face of a common enemy, uniting is the general trend. We should promote the process of this kind of uniting. For the Church, this kind of free cannon fodder is naturally more the better." Eudora's words almost said all that Fendes wanted to say, and her tone was not polite. Fendes smiled as if he didn't feel it. "Your Holiness is right. Now the three supreme angels are in retreat in the Light Divinity Hall. We should deal with these things as soon as possible. Her Highness Eudora will be responsible for these two things." Everyone nodded. The Lord of the Tsung Thunder Palace, Gamundan, said, "Now the Rio Empire only exists in name. In the Battle of Vestian, the Temple Knights and the Priest Legion have suffered heavy losses. Should we transfer Sir Pari and Miss Miranda back to White Cliff?" Eudora glanced at Gamundan indifferently. Queen Rambise's prestige in the Rio Empire is quite high. This time, she showed extraordinary courage in defending the capital. Although the Rio Empire is temporarily destroyed, many subjects still escaped. In the future, Rambis will still be of great use. We must protect her safety. The reason why I reported to Lord Raphael and requested for Pari to be deployed as reinforcements and guards is also because of the Church's protection of the Holy Empire. I've even sent my only direct disciple, Miranda. Could it be that you still have some selfish motives?" Jamadan shook his head and did not say anything more. In fact, everyone present knew that Pari had always been targeted and excluded by Eudora. This time, it was obvious that she was using her position to take revenge and wanted to use the Abyss to eliminate her dissidents. However, Eudora had also sent Miranda out, which made him speechless. A sneer flashed across Eudora's face. Pari knew too many of her secrets. Some secrets could directly affect her ascension to the throne of the Pope. Although with Passari's character, he would not reveal them under normal circumstances, only a dead person was the safest. Therefore, in the name of righteousness, she requested Raphael's order to transfer Pari to support Vestian urgently. She also sent her own disciple, Miranda, to monitor him. She wanted to completely eradicate Pari. As for Miranda, she had already been forced to sign the contract. Compared with the position of the Pope, sacrificing a disciple was nothing. "Okay, it's decided," Eudora said in a tough tone. Gamundan clenched his fists. At this moment, the Knights of the Divine Hall outside hurriedly reported, "Sirs." In the distant sky above the White Cliff, the pure white clouds slowly turned into the color of blood. The color slowly spread towards the direction of Sacred Light City. Wherever it passed, it was plated with a layer of demonic blood red. Chapter 1234. At the peak of the Holy Mountain, in the Temple of Light. "Michael, this sword formation of great light consumes too much power. My kingdom's power is almost depleted, and I need more power of faith to replenish it. Otherwise, I won't be able to continue." The one who said this was none other than the other peak fake god from the surface world, Lager, who had fought with Shinrei when the gate of the two realms appeared. Lager, don't push your luck. I've already given you 1/3 of the power of faith accumulated on the holy mountain. Isn't that enough? Michael raised his eyebrows and was about to lose his temper. After suffering a crushing defeat to Quiriana, Michael and the other two returned to the holy mountain with injuries. In order to deal with the powerful Quiriana, Michael found the sword formation of Great Light that the god of light had left behind. The sword formation of Great Light was extremely powerful. Back in the War of the Gods, its name struck fear into the hearts of many. The problem was that the core of the formation was divine power. Since the gods had fallen, they could no longer obtain the protection of divine power. Even the barrier of the main plane formed by the gods was weakening year by year. It could only be maintained by sacrificing lives. Michael's plan was to use the power of faith and life condensed by the Book of Creation to barely replace it. Although its power would be greatly reduced, it would at least have a fighting chance. Lager was originally one of the oracles and had the talent to absorb, transfer, and instill faith. This time, the three angels invited Lager here to borrow his talent to complete the sword formation of Great Light and fight against Quiriana. Lager had wanted to join the holy mountain back then and get a share of the god of light's faith. However, because of his greed, the three angels detested him, so he was rejected. Although Lager did not dare to fall out with them because of his inferior strength, he had always held a grudge. Now that the three angels had something to ask of him, they naturally took advantage of the situation and raised many excessive demands, including 1/3 of the power of faith that the holy mountain of light had accumulated. Now they even asked for more faith, which made the three angels burst with anger. Michael's eyes were filled with killing intent. Normally, he would have fallen out with them, but for the sword formation of Great Light, he could only temporarily hold back his anger. Gabriel sneered. Lager, don't be too greedy. We've already made an agreement, and even signed the contract long ago. At our level, we naturally understand that there are loopholes in contracts. Right now, I'm the one who has contributed the most, and I've even exceeded expectations. Naturally, I need to compensate you. Raquel glanced at Gabriel mockingly. Are you on the same level as us? Raphael was indeed an expert at attracting hatred. His words made Raquel's face turn red. Why don't you find someone else to do it? In any case, I'm all alone. I can't compare to your Church of Light, which has a huge business. Raquel knew that the Great Light Sword formation couldn't do without him. If you continue to be so long-winded, we might as well break up. Gabriel said coldly. The destruction of the abyss is indiscriminate. If worst comes to worst, when Quiriana comes, everyone will be annihilated together. Raquel narrowed his eyes and looked at Michael, provoking him. Gabriel can represent you? Of course. Raphael beat him to it. The three of us have always been on the same side. Michael was already at the end of his patience. He looked at Raphael, then at Gabriel, and nodded. Since you're so insistent, then let's tear up the contract. Raquel's eyes twitched. He only wanted to take the opportunity to bargain. If he really tore up the contract, the safety rules in the contract would also become invalid. Looking at the stance of the three, they would probably kill him immediately. This was their lair, and he had no confidence in escaping alive under the joint attack of the three angels. The Great Light Sword formation has already been completed so much, and now you're telling me to give up. Raquel was extraordinarily thick-skinned. He said in a dignified manner, The most important thing now is to join hands to fight against the abyss. Put everything else aside. The three angels were very disdainful of Raquel's attitude, but now was not the time to be calculative. They had to complete the Great Light Sword formation as soon as possible. Gabriel had purposely mocked Raquel just now to knock him down a peg, not to really give up. At this moment, Michael suddenly sensed something. His figure swayed, and he disappeared on the spot. Michael was not the only one. The other three had also sensed something amiss, and they all left the Temple of Light one after another. Looking forward from the Holy Light Mountain, they could see a large patch of blood-red sky rapidly spreading toward Holy Light City. Abyss! Raphael's expression changed. The abyss, which was supposed to be wreaking havoc in the eastern part of the continent, had actually invaded the Holy Light Mountain. Could it be that Quiriana's injuries had healed so quickly? The previous battle in the Silver Moon Immortal Capital had made the three angels realize the gap between them and Quiriana. If the Great Light Sword formation had been completed, they might have been able to put up a fight. However, the Great Light Sword formation was not yet complete. White Cliff was the base camp of the Church of Light. It had stood in the world for many years, and no one could shake it. This was not only because of their faith and deterrence, but also because of their strength. Perhaps they had to thank Shinrei and Ben Hong. After the few times they had broken into the Holy Light Mountain, their defenses had been strengthened by several times. Now, whenever they encountered a situation, their reaction speed was extremely fast. This was especially so after Michael issued the highest state of alert, and all defenses were activated. The originally spacious streets now had many fortress-like iron gates, and the seemingly decorative pillars on both sides had turned into magic formation towers that could attack any approaching enemies. Holy Light City, which relied on the Holy Light Mountain, had also become a heavily armed city. All of the Radiant Knights, Judges, and the Holy Light Knights under the jurisdiction of the Three Peaks were quickly mobilized and assembled. The speed of the blood-red clouds gradually slowed down, but the iron gates began to crumble at a speed visible to the naked eye. The magic formation towers, which were constantly activated, were also rapidly collapsing. All of this was caused by an endless tide of blood-red creatures. Everything in their way, be it the Radiant Knights or the buildings, was drowned in this blood-red flood. When the last iron gate was reached, countless flashing white meteors descended from the sky, and the flood at the forefront was engulfed by the meteors. Several flames and sword lights flew out from the rear of the blood-red army, trying to resist the meteors, but the flames were instantly extinguished by the meteors. Only the sword lights managed to resist, but still could not stop the falling meteors. This was no longer an ordinary light magic, luminous meteors, but a killer move that contained the power of a peak demigod, Star Judgment. The origin of the meteors was a silver spear engraved with simple patterns. It was held in the hand of an 8-winged angel in the sky. It was the strongest demigod, Camel. The light of the spear of judgment grew brighter and brighter. Even the elite abyssal lords could not withstand it, and were turned into ashes by the falling meteors. The power of Star Judgment was astonishing. All the abyssal creatures that approached were annihilated, but it consumed a lot of power. After a while, Camel began to feel a little tired. However, the rhythm of the flood did not change at all, as if they did not know that death was in front of them. They kept advancing, including the abyssal lords who caused the most pressure. The entire abyssal army seemed endless, and did not diminish at all. Some crystal objects appeared in the flood of abyssal creatures. Upon closer inspection, they were duo crimson crystal flowers, emitting a demonic bloody color. Flowers of abyss. These flowers exploded at the same time, turning into a bloody mist that spread out. In the bloody mist, the monsters all changed. The skinny gap demons became extremely strong, and the bone spikes of the violent demons doubled in length. These changes were not only superficial, but also brought a leap in power. Among the dazzling stars, the originally weak sword light became fierce. As several sword auras crisscrossed, the Star Judgment was actually torn apart. The abyssal army was like a flood that had opened the floodgates. In an instant, they had already surged through the last iron gate and rushed in the direction of Holy Light City. Camel could not stop them in time and was surrounded by flying sword auras. The elite abyssal lords that had been strengthened by the flowers of abyss gave Camel a sense of danger. He forcefully suppressed the backlash from the collapse of his ultimate move and shook the spear in his hand to deflect the attacking sword auras. Then, he pierced through the chest of the abyssal lord at the front. In the past, even an elite lord of the abyss would have been annihilated by this attack. Now, however, the lord of the abyss only roared angrily and continued to charge forward fearlessly, ignoring the huge hole in its chest. Camel did not dare to be careless. He flashed and appeared at the side of the abyssal lord. With a precise sweep of the spear, he smashed the Abyssal Lord's wound from the side. Finally, the Abyssal Lord could not take it anymore, and its body was torn into pieces. Camel looked at the large number of Abyssal Lords and fiery sorceresses in front of him. He waved his hand, and a group of angels appeared in the air behind him. There were 6-winged, 4-winged, and 2-winged angels, and they faced the enemies. Without the air resistance, the Abyssal army on the ground quickly approached Holy Light City. At this moment, a cold snort sounded in everyone's heart. Then, they saw a sun-like radiance appear on the Holy Light Mountain, illuminating the entire white cliff. Wherever the radiance went, all the blood-red color turned into particles and dissipated. In the blink of an eye, the blood-red color disappeared like a receding tide. When the sunlight gradually disappeared, all the blood-red color and the terrifying, suffocating feeling disappeared. Even the opponents of Camel and the others in the air were turned into ashes. The radiant knights and the believers of Holy Light City knew that it must have been the 3 supreme angels who had made a move. All of them cheered and their morale was greatly boosted. However, the blood-red color didn't disappear completely. Since the starting point, it made a comeback, and it was still as fierce and endless as before. On the holy mountain, Raphael pointed his silver staff forward. He was about to attack again when he was stopped by Michael. "There's no way to kill all these small fries. Don't waste your energy for nothing. The real enemy. It's already appeared," Gabriel finished. His silver-red eyes, which had been closed all this time, had already opened. In the blood-red clouds in the sky behind the Abyssal army, a pair of eyes vaguely appeared. This pair of eyes had a strange power. Just one look at them would make one's soul tremble irresistibly. It was as if all the strength and courage had disappeared, and only fear was left. The blood-red clouds became thinner and thinner, as if they were being absorbed by something on the ground. Scorching lava flowed on the ground. Countless sparkling and translucent blood-red light flashed in the lava, and countless flowers of the abyss flowed out. In the center of the crystalline light, a figure gradually became clearer. This was the body of a man. He had a handsome appearance, long purplish-green hair, a slender figure, and pointy ears. His pupils flickered with a demonic blood-red color. "Saspak, the ruler of terror!" Michael said in a low voice, and he clenched the Holy Cross sword in his hand. Chapter 1235. As soon as Saspak appeared, the cheers of the Holy Mountain of Light stopped abruptly. Everyone felt an inexplicable pressure in their hearts. Their throats seemed to be stuck, and it was extremely difficult for them to even speak. Under this invisible pressure, an inexplicable fear grew in everyone's heart. The handsome man revealed a weird smile and walked into the sky step by step, as if there were invisible stairs under his feet. The army of the abyss also stopped. The violent monsters suddenly became extremely quiet, but in the hearts of the people of the church, the pressure was even greater than before. It was like the calm before the storm. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael appeared in the sky at the same time. Raphael did not follow them, but only watched the battle from afar. "Saspak!" Mijiao Lai's gaze locked onto this oppressive enemy. "You're alone? Where's Quiriana? Do you think I need Quiliana to deal with these minions?" Sasbaka's smile was a bit more disdainful. "Hand over the Book of Creation, and maybe I can grant you to become slaves of the Abyss." "Book of Creation?" Raphael said coldly. "You will have the chance to see it at the last moment of your life." Sasbak shook his head. "Ignorant weaklings are fearless. Don't you realize how weak you are? Cut the crap. Since we're here, let's fight to the death," Gabriel said in a deep voice, and the holy song sword emitted a powerful sharpness. The 3 angels were connected, and the power of the kingdom that had been brewing burst out at the same time. In the blink of an eye, the kingdoms had merged together, and the resonance they emitted was like the ravings of the ancient gods. Among the 3 lords of the abyss, the hate lord Quiriana was the strongest. Although the fear lord Sasbak was not as strong as Quiriana, he ranked second and was stronger than the despair lord Delothro. The 3 angels had already felt the terrible aura coming from Sasbak, so they used the strongest joint attack, the Oracle Circle, right from the start. Sasbak, who was trapped by the Oracle formation, did not panic. Instead, a blood-colored mist rose from his body. This mist expanded rapidly, as if it was going to burst the kingdom power of the Oracle formation. Suddenly, Sasbak's sneer froze. That was because the mist had stopped expanding and was even shrinking rapidly. A huge pressure came over. Not only did he fail to destroy the other party's kingdom, but he was also suppressed instead. Sasbak could not help but be slightly surprised. It seemed that the strength of the three supreme angels was not as weak as he had imagined. This was the home field of the Holy Mountain of Light. Not only did the Oracle formation combine the kingdoms of the three pinnacle false gods, but it also gathered the immense power of faith of the entire Church of Light. The three supreme angels exhausted their entire life's efforts, not hesitating to deceive the heavens and cross the sea, using the name of the light god to steal faith in order to achieve godhood. Gabriel even went to the Black Prison Desert and established a desert goddess in the name of Tessaniel. Unfortunately, she could not really absorb and use the power of faith. Even if the utilization rate was extremely low, the accumulated power of faith was extremely shocking. Therefore, the power of the Oracle formation that the three supreme angels used in their home field was far more powerful than when they faced Quiriana. Sinners who have lost their way, accept the guidance of the light of cleansing! The voices of the three angels resounded in the Holy Mountain of Light at the same time. They immediately released the killer move of the Oracle formation, the light of cleansing. A huge halo appeared around Sasbak, containing the supreme essence of the universe and stars. In an instant, the power of the entire Holy Mountain of Light was concentrated in this halo. The blood-colored mist lingering around Sasbak was sucked in by this halo, and it could not play any role. The halo shrank bit by bit. Sasbak clearly felt the danger, and the contempt on his face disappeared. His fists turned into countless afterimages as he punched toward the halo. The halo trembled slightly, but it did not change and continued to shrink. Traces of cracks began to appear on Sasbak's face and body, and within the cracks, blood could vaguely be seen. In the distance, Raquel's eyes lit up. The combat power of the three supreme angels was too shocking. They had actually reached this level. As long as Sasbak died, the abyssal army attacking White Cliff would naturally disappear. Fortunately, he did not shed all pretenses of cordiality before. At this moment, Sasbak shouted, and his body changed. The pupils of his blood-red eyes turned dark green, and sharp horns grew on his head. His muscles rapidly expanded, and his thin body became incomparably strong. Sharp bone spurs appeared on his back, and the sinister exoskeleton covering his entire body was like a natural armor. He continued to wave his fists. This punch landed on the white halo, but the halo did not tremble like before. Instead, everyone's heart trembled. 1 punch, 2 punches, 3 punches, the speed was not fast, but it was like a heavy hammer pounding on everyone's heart. Those with ordinary power were fine, but Camel and the other super angels all revealed pained expressions and clutched their chests. Ligel and the 3 supreme angels were in even worse pain. Ligel's face was deathly pale, and the ones who suffered the heaviest damage were the 3 supreme angels who had used the light of cleansing. The light around their bodies dimmed, and their facial features were bleeding. Sasbak stopped punching and calmly walked out of the light of purification halo. With every step he took, the halo behind him trembled even more violently. Bang! The halo finally collapsed, and at the same time, the entire oracle array collapsed. The 3 angels flew backward as if they were struck by lightning and fell from the sky. Such a petty trick actually took me 10 punches. But it's a pity that the faith I gathered was wasted. Sasbak shook his head, as if he had just completed a trivial matter. Raquel, who was in the air, felt a chill in his heart. If it were Raquel himself, he would not have been able to withstand a single blow from the 3 angels' united kingdom. Yet, it completely collapsed under Sasbak's 10 punches. The scene of Michael and the others being defeated caused shock and fear in the Church of Light below. The 3 supreme angels, who had always been high and mighty, second only to the god of light, were actually defeated by the leader of the Abyss army. Sasbach took a deep breath, as if he was enjoying the feeling of fear. His green pupils deepened. "It's a wonderful feeling. As a reward, I will grant you even deeper fear." With that, the Abyss army, which had been quiet all this time, began to move. They surged forward in a frenzy, and Holy Light City immediately fell into panic. 3 beams of light slowly rose into the air again. They were the 3 supreme angels. The armor of faith on their bodies cracked, and a large amount of blood flowed out of their mouths and noses. Casting the light of cleansing had cost them a lot, and now that the oracle formation had been destroyed, the 3 of them had suffered serious injuries. "We can only use that move." Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael looked at each other, then his gaze fell on Raquel. "Raquel, if you want to live, you have to give it your all." Raquel understood Michael's meaning. He gritted his teeth, and his body emitted waves of cold air. Ripples of aura rippled out. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael appeared beside Raquel. The Holy Cross sword, the silver staff, and the Holy Melody sword were placed together. They flashed with pure white light, and the purest and most powerful aura was emitted. It fused with the cold air and condensed into a huge crystal. The Book of Creation? Sasbach immediately sensed the aura of the origin of creation. Using your own life force to fuse with the creation vessel. Stupid thing! The crystal shone brightly, and the surrounding light quickly began to dim. It seemed that all the power in the world was gathered here. Sasbach didn't care about the 4 of them. He waved his claws and said disdainfully, "Don't you understand? The true extreme of the origin can also restrain and promote each other. It's useless to use the Book of Creation to restrain me." As soon as he finished speaking, thousands of rays of light with unparalleled sharpness whizzed toward Sasbach at an incomparably fast speed. Sasbach stretched out his right palm and faced it. With his palm as the center, a faint blood-colored barrier appeared. The rays of light hit the blood-colored barrier like snowflakes falling on a flame, dissipating one after another. However, the blood-colored barrier didn't completely dissipate the rays of light. A ray of light penetrated the barrier like lightning and swept past Sasbach's face, leaving a sword-like scratch. A drop of green blood flowed out of the wound and slid down. Sasbach's green pupils constricted slightly. This was the first time he was truly injured since the battle. Even though it was a minor injury, it was still an injury. Then, more rays of light penetrated the blood-colored barrier. The speed and sharpness of these rays were extremely shocking. In an instant, many wounds appeared on Sasbach's body. Sasbach didn't expect that the opponent's power could actually break through his defense. In shock and anger, he waved his claws, and a blood cloud containing terrifying power flew directly toward the crystal formation formed by the 4 of them. The light emitted by the crystal pierced the blood cloud with thousands of holes. In an instant, the light merged into one and turned into a huge sword. When the sword collided with the blood cloud, it was as if it had encountered the sharpest weapon and was torn apart. After the huge sword pierced through the blood cloud, its momentum didn't decrease. It flew straight toward Sasbach. Sasbach was caught off guard and was pierced by the sword. His entire body was instantly torn apart, and the huge sword gradually disappeared. Michael and the others were excited, but soon their expressions became solemn again. That was because the split was just an illusion. The real Sasbach had already appeared in another direction. This isn't a pure power of creation attack, but the sword formation of great light. Sasbach finally understood. You only realized it now? At least you can understand why you died. Michael sneered, and the crystal formation began to shine brightly again. Shameless boasting! Sasbach shook his head indifferently. It's just an incomplete sword formation of great light. It's strong in offense but weak in defense. Even in its complete state, it can't unleash its true power without the support of divine power. Sasbach indeed had amazing eyesight. He could see the weakness of the sword formation of great light at a glance. Michael and the others didn't get distracted because of this. Then, the power of faith condensed by the book of creation quickly began to condense. Although the killing blow of the sword formation had missed, it could be seen from Sasbaka's dodging that he expressed considerable fear of this sword. Moreover, the sword light from before had also caused him minor injuries. In the next attack, they must completely kill Sasbak. Despair is de Lazaro's favorite trick. Unfortunately, he's not here. Then, let me completely kill your hope. As he spoke, a crimson bow appeared in Sasbaka's hand. He slowly pulled it open. There were no arrows on the bow, but the invisible force that was constantly gathering was getting more and more terrifying. It had already faintly condensed into an energy arrow, emitting a fierce light. Seeing this bow, Raphael couldn't help but blurt out, "One of the 3 elven bows, flame bow!" Chapter 1236. Michael and the others were all knowledgeable. They were slightly surprised when they heard Raphael mention the crimson bow. The 3 elven bows were the treasures of the elves. They were all artifacts. It was said that they were the weapons used by the Moonlight Goddess. The Moonlight Cloud Bow was the leader, and the other 2 bows were the Mystic Moon Bow and the Crimson Flame Bow. The Mystic Moon Bow was severely damaged during the War of the Gods, and its power was greatly reduced. During the chaos of the elves 20,000 years ago, in order to seal the power of the abyss, the Elven King, Span, used his own life as a medium and overdrew the power of the Mystic Moon Bow to seal the abyss temporarily. The Mystic Moon Bow lost almost all its power, but it was kept as a symbol. The Mystic Moon Bow could gather the power of moonlight to attack, the Crimson Flame Bow could shoot the power of flames, and the Moonlight Cloud Bow was the strongest, able to transform and shoot the arrow of faith. The Mystic Moon Bow only existed in name. The Moonlight Cloud Bow had been passed down as a token of the Elven Queens, and the Crimson Flame Bow had disappeared decades ago. It was unexpected that it would appear in the hands of the feared Dominator. The 3 Supreme Angels and Raquel understood another thing at the same time. The 3 elven bows could only be activated with the power of the elves' bloodline. Sasbaka's appearance before he transformed was clearly a half-elf, which might be one of the reasons why he deliberately chose the half-elf body. It was just the Crimson Flame Bow. After countless lives and destruction, it can now be called the Abyss Bow. Sasbaka's smile became more and more devilish, and the previous wounds had all disappeared. Although his tone was casual, his eyes were solemn. Obviously, this arrow was not to be trifled with. The power of destruction gathered on the Crimson Flame Bow was getting stronger and stronger. Before it was released, the surrounding space had already become a vacuum under the brewing of the terrifying power. Michael and the other 3 were also like arrows on the bowstring. Under the activation of the Book of Creation, the power of the Great Light Sword formation had been raised to the peak, and its power was even greater than before. Once again, tens of thousands of sharp sword lights converged into one, forming an incomparably sharp giant sword that pierced towards Sasbak. Contrary to the power of the Crimson Flame Bow, the surrounding space did not distort. Instead, it was solidified by the sword chi. Everything in the world had become this sword. Sasbak didn't dodge. Instead, his green eyes were filled with sharpness, and he suddenly released the bowstring that had been taut all this time. A blood-red stream of light shot out, shattering the void along the way. Both attacks were as fast as lightning. From afar, it looked like a snow-white great sword and a blood-red line collided. The 2 completely different solidified and shattered space also intersected. At the last moment of contact, the spectators felt their vision suddenly slow down. Then, the entire world began to tremble violently. The earth quaked, the mountains swayed, and space shattered. Everyone's consciousness went blank. Many of their consciousnesses were directly annihilated by the trembling. After a long while, the trembling finally stopped. The blood-red abyssal army that was charging at them from behind had been vaporized by the terrifying shockwaves from the collision just now. The mountains had been razed to the ground, and Holy Light City, which was covered in defensive barriers, had almost completely collapsed. The city walls and buildings had all collapsed. If it weren't for the three main peaks of the Holy Mountain of Light connecting the Power of Faith with Holy Light City, the entire Holy Light City would have long been pulverized. A rumbling sound could be heard coming from behind Holy Light City. The highest symbol of the Church of Light, the Holy Mountain of Light, had actually collapsed in half. The torrent of the abyss was endless, and it soon began to spread again. On the other hand, Holy Light City not only suffered heavy casualties, but even the most important barrier had been destroyed. The situation was very bad. In the sky, both sides were still facing each other. Southback slowly put down the crimson flame bow. Affected by this action, the exoskeleton armor wrapped around Southback's body showed a few cracks. Countless small wounds appeared on his face and body, and dark green blood seeped out. The corners of Southback's mouth curled up slightly. He saw the crystals of the Great Light Sword formation tremble before suddenly turning into countless sparkling powder and dissipating without a trace. The Great Light Sword formation was broken. Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael were like kites with their strings cut. They fell to the ground, and their auras had already fallen to the lowest point. They had basically lost their combat strength. The expressions and eyes of the three of them were filled with despair. The Great Light Sword formation, which had been formed by the combined power of the four of them, had actually been destroyed by a single arrow from Southback. Unlike the fall of the three Supreme Angels, Raquel was sent flying after the Great Light Sword formation collapsed. It seemed like he had been hit by the huge recoil from the Crimson Flame bow, but he had actually borrowed the recoil to fly away, wanting to escape this dangerous battlefield. Southback looked at the three Supreme Angels on the ground, but he didn't kill them immediately. Instead, his figure flickered, and he chased after Raquel. That sword attack from the Great Light Sword formation just now was extraordinary. Although it had been destroyed by his arrow, he had felt a real threat. There was another key factor here, and that was that the Great Light Sword formation wasn't complete. If it had been the sword formation at its peak, even with the Crimson Flame bow, it would be hard to say who would be the winner. Now that the three Supreme Angels were heavily injured and their powers had collapsed, they were no longer a threat. Instead, it was this Raquel who was clearly the core of the Great Light Sword formation. He had to be eliminated first to prevent future troubles. As Raquel borrowed the recoil to fly away, a blue light appeared beside him, and he had already entered the spatial door. Originally, the barrier of the Holy Light Mountain was extremely powerful, and ordinary spatial doors wouldn't be able to open them. However, after that earth-shattering attack just now, the barrier's power had been greatly weakened, and the direction that Raquel was escaping towards was the weakest part of the barrier. Suddenly, Raquel felt the space around him solidify, and his entire body was pulled back by a huge force. He had actually returned to the Holy Light Mountain through the spatial door. Raquel was so shocked that his soul almost left his body. He heard the voice that he was most afraid of ringing out behind him. "You can't escape." Raquel turned around, trembling, and saw Southback floating in the air behind him. His face had already returned to its original state, and the cracks on his armor had automatically healed. Clearly, he hadn't suffered any real injuries. As the core of the Great Light Sword formation, you actually still have so much energy left. So you've been planning to escape since the beginning. If you go all out, you might be able to make me expend more energy. I'm just... Southback's devilish smile made Raquel break out in a cold sweat. Thoughts flashing through his mind, he hurriedly said, "I'm willing to submit to you, my lord, and become a servant of the abyss." At this time, in order to save his life, Raquel didn't care about anything else. "Oh?" Southback looked at Raquel playfully, and nodded. "That's right, I seem to have said something like this at the beginning. All right, I accept your submission." Raquel secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to speak, he was suddenly alarmed. Before he could dodge, he felt his neck tighten, and Southback's claws had already grabbed him tightly. "Spare me, my lord, I'm sincerely submitting." Raquel was shocked, and hurriedly explained. "So what?" Southback's claws slowly tightened. Raquel clearly felt the threat of death, and was greatly shocked. He struggled to open his mouth. My lord, didn't you say that was before the battle? Now, the preferential treatment is over. Sasbaka's smile became more and more cruel. He suddenly exerted force, and Lager felt that his kingdom's power that was protecting him was instantly destroyed. He was scared out of his wits, and before he could even beg for mercy, his whole body suddenly exploded. On the ground, just as Salzbach was chasing Raquel, Gabriel used the holy hymn sword to support her body and slowly stood up. Half of her silver wings were broken, and she was covered in blood. She took a deep breath, and as if she had made up her mind, a ball of faint white light appeared in her hand, emanating the aura of the origin of creation. Michael, Raphael, fuse your creation vessel and book of creation. Michael also stood up, and after hearing Gabriel's words, he immediately understood. Don't tell me you want to, 1 person dying is better than 3. Gabriel's silver and red pupils revealed a resolute light as she said indifferently. This indifference, with a calm determination. Raphael was originally panting heavily, but when he heard this, he was suddenly shocked. The 3 of us have survived the 2 battles of the gods. I didn't expect this day to come. Michael smiled bitterly, and the same white light appeared in his hand, but he did not extend it in front of Gabriel. If this is to be done, it should be me, the Archangel. You don't have to fight with me, because this is my choice. When Gabriel said the word choice, her heart seemed to overlap with another shadow, and her blood-stained face looked more peaceful. Moreover, you are different from me. You still have persistence, I have already, Tashaniel. Raphael clenched his fists, and his nails that had sunk into his flesh were already bleeding. Call me Gabriel. Gabriel glanced at Raphael. Live. Raphael's body trembled violently. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say it. Step by step, he walked to Gabriel's side, and a ball of white light appeared in his hand. It was 1/3 of the creation vessel and a page of the book of creation. The 2 balls of white light of the same origin quickly fused together. At this moment, Raphael's hand moved, and his knife-like palm heavily cut the back of Gabriel's neck. Gabriel did not expect Raphael to attack him at this time. In addition, he was seriously injured and his defense was at its weakest, so he immediately fainted. Raphael embraced Gabriel's limp body, and with the other hand controlling the fused book of creation, he shouted, Michael! The change just now was completely beyond Michael's expectations, and he could not stop it in time. He exclaimed, Raphael! You! Raphael shook his head. We don't have much time left. If we hesitate any longer, we won't even have someone to take revenge on. Michael took the fainted Gabriel and looked deeply at Raphael, as if meeting this companion for the first time. He also fused his creation vessel and book of creation into Raphael's hands. Raphael looked at Gabriel in Michael's arms, and an unknown light flashed in his eyes. Let's go! Michael did not hesitate. The golden wings on his back burned, and he turned into a white light with Gabriel in his arms. With the last of his strength, he flew backward. At such a rapid speed, some kind of distortion occurred in the space, and Michael's figure also began to distort and blur. Sasbach, who had just killed Raphael, immediately felt the abnormality in the space. He was not surprised that the 3 supreme angels had escaped. He sneered. Under my watch, you still want to escape? With the strength of Michael and the other 2, even if they were not injured, he was confident that he could catch up, let alone in this situation. Raphael was the best example. Sasbach was about to give chase when he suddenly felt an extreme sense of danger, as if he was locked on by some terrifying power. If he acted rashly, this power that even he was afraid of would completely erupt. The source of this feeling was the figure emitting white light on the ground. It was actually Raphael. You used your life force to destroy the book of creation and the entire holy mountain of light. After Sasbach sensed Raphael's intentions, he turned into a bloody light without hesitation and rushed towards Raphael. I used to laugh at Ben Hong for being fettered by meaningless emotions. Raphael did not look at Sasbach, and only whispered in a voice that only he could hear. Actually, that is what I truly desire. Before he finished speaking, his entire figure completely turned into white light, and the light of returning to the origin instantly filled the entire white cliff. Chapter 1237. The light didn't cause too much shock or destruction. Everything within its range quieted down, including the flood of abyssal monsters and the panicking Holy Light City. Everything began to distort in a strange way. The blood-red lava actually transformed into a clear spring, while the abyssal monsters solidified into clay statues. As the clear spring washed over them, they all softened into soil and stone. The collapsed Holy Light City turned into a forest. Trees appeared, and the ground was covered in fresh flowers and weeds. It was full of vitality. However, the original life no longer existed. There was a deathly stillness. Deathly stillness and vitality blended together, forming a strange atmosphere. This was a new kind of creation. From another point of view, it was actually another kind of destruction. The white light in the center of the light dimmed a little. It had been caught by a claw. The claw's skin and flesh were torn open, and green blood kept dripping. Not only the claw, but the whole ferocious figure was badly mutilated. White bones could even be seen in many wounds. "Damned little minions! How dare you hurt my soul origin so badly?" Sasbak roared angrily. Under the emotional turmoil, the white light in the claw couldn't be controlled. The bone spurs on his shoulder and elbow trembled, and green leaves grew out. Sasbaka's face twitched. Green blood light flew out of the claw and wrapped the book of creation in his hand. His whole body in the blood ball, in his hand, gradually dimmed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. For a world where communication was quite advanced, the transmission of news was extremely fast, especially bad news. In the next few days, a sensational news shocked the whole world. White Cliff, the headquarters of the Church of Light, was completely destroyed by the abyss. It had become a dead land. White Cliff was the holy land in the eyes of countless believers of light. It was blessed by the God of Light, guarded by powerful angels led by the three supreme angels, and countless knights of light. It was the holy and supreme core of faith. Unexpectedly, it was completely destroyed by the abyssal monsters. Where were the knights of light? Where were the angels? Where were the gods? Not only the believers of the Church of Light, but all humans fell into a panic. Even a giant like the Church of Light fell at the foot of the abyss. Then, who could stop these monsters? For a time, more and more people fled to the west of the mainland. Many countries were still far from the eastern continent where the Blue Glory Empire was located, but the kings and nobles had already fled, and the people were also fleeing. Public security was in chaos, and there were also Black Death cult or lawbreakers who took the opportunity to cause trouble. The entire surface world was in unprecedented turmoil. However, even the Ryo Empire and the Holy Mountain were destroyed by the abyssal monsters. Where was the safest place? Shinrui received the news the day after the Holy Mountain was destroyed. He was also shocked. He immediately used the Star Gate and came to the Temple of Light Shrine. Sure enough, the original White Cliff had changed completely. The Holy Light City and the Holy Mountain had become a jungle ruin. Shinrui sensed a familiar power from it, the power of creation. It must have been caused by the three supreme angels using the Book of Creation. However, the scope and power of this power of creation was so amazing that even Shinrui could not help but shudder. What kind of battle happened? Was the enemy Quiriana, Sasbak, or Delothro? Where was the Book of Creation now? Had the three supreme angels all fallen? Were there any other survivors? In any case, the destruction of White Cliff was a fact. Shinrui did not stay at the broken White Cliff for long. He went straight back to the demon realm. After arranging some related affairs, he went into closed-door training again. The White Cliff today was likely to be another place tomorrow, or even the demon realm. It was likely that his home and the people he cherished the most would be destroyed. Therefore, it was more and more urgent to improve his strength. The progress of fusing the constellations was not as smooth as expected. Even Rala could not find the feeling she had when facing Quiriana at that time. In the super system, Shenrei deduced more mysteries of the gods of heaven mirror based on the planet's faith and life that everyone used the power of the constellations. The power had also increased a lot. However, Shenrei, who had fought with Quiriana, knew very well that this was not enough. It was far from enough. In the face of the increasing number of fugitives, the countries in the west were under tremendous pressure. The largest country, Dragon Bright Empire, was the first to bear the brunt. Not to mention that the abyss was far away in the east, just these flocking refugees were a disaster. The price of various materials such as food and clothing skyrocketed, and the currency depreciated rapidly. There were also riots and looting incidents from time to time. The order was in chaos. Rex the Great quickly convened the leaders of the nearby kingdoms in the western continent to hold a meeting to discuss how to deal with the current situation. The first problem was the resettlement of refugees. Due to the large number of people, it would bring a series of negative effects. Even an empire like the Long Huang Empire could not accommodate so many refugees. What's more, this was just the beginning. As time passed and the abyss expanded, the situation would get worse. After a round of discussion, the various countries reached a certain consensus on the resettlement of refugees, prices, the economy, and other issues. However, everyone was very clear about the fact that the current discussion was only a temporary measure. It was just like treating a disease. It could only treat the symptoms but not the root cause. The real root was the abyss. Therefore, the most important core topic was discussed at the end of the meeting, which was how to deal with the abyss. At present, the abyss had destroyed most of the countries in the east of the human world. To put it bluntly, the central and eastern regions were just struggling. If this continued, the scarlet tide would spread all the way and cover the entire world sooner or later. By then, humans would be completely extinct. Even if they could not destroy the power of the abyss, they had to stop the monsters. Otherwise, they would collapse before the abyss even reached them. There was no doubt about the combat power of the abyss. Judging from the countries that were destroyed before, the most terrifying thing about the monsters was their endless numbers and fearlessness. The only battle that humans won against the abyss was the Battle of the Blue Glory Kingdom. In the end, Rambus still led the army and people to retreat from the Ryo Empire. Judging from the number and strength of the army, even the human allied army could not fight against the abyss. Therefore, they had to rely on other factors, such as geographical advantage. Even the powerful Thorn Fortress of the Ryo Empire only lasted for 2 hours. However, this geographical advantage was man-made. The geographical factor that Rex the Great mentioned was the largest natural barrier, the White Sea. The White Sea covered a large area, dividing the surface world into 2 parts, the East and the West. This was also one of the reasons why there were 2 holy empires in the East and West. If they were too close, due to the conflict of interests, there would be frequent wars. Originally, there was a Cloud Empire in the middle, which was known as the 3 Holy Empires. It was precisely because of the White Sea that it took a lot of time to travel from the east to the west of the human world. Starlight Kingdom, Roya Kingdom, and other countries spent a lot of effort to build the teleportation portal to cross the White Sea. With the teleportation portal, the time to travel between the east and the west could be greatly reduced. This was why Raisin the Great only gave Shenrei a month to go to the Ryo Empire to pick up the bride. If the teleportation portal was destroyed, they could only cross the White Sea by boat. It would take at least a few months, and it was still under the condition that everything went smoothly. Therefore, the White Sea was the best barrier for humans to resist the abyss. The abyss monsters usually carried the power of flames. With the existence of the sea, the monsters would also be restrained accordingly. The urgent task was to quickly establish a strong unified defense line in the countries along the White Sea and build a large number of fleets and air forces to prepare for the sea war with the Abyss army. The teleportation portal must be destroyed. As for the countries east of the White Sea, it would depend on their own escape speed. The geographical conditions alone were not enough. They could only stop the Abyss for a while at most. They needed to gather more and stronger forces. Dragons, elves, dwarves, orcs, all of these added up couldn't compare to the weight of one party, Demons. In the Battle of the Lan Yao Kingdom, the reinforcements of the demons played a vital role. The unprecedentedly powerful army was actually not revealed in the war in the Jin Yao territory. If it weren't for these strange troops, even with the scattered reinforcements of Sandro and various races, Rambis and the Lan Yao Kingdom would not be able to resist the Abyss army. Only by uniting the demons, it was possible to compete and even defeat the Abyss. Now that the portal still existed in the Jin Yao territory, once humans were destroyed by the Abyss, the demons would definitely not be spared. There was an old saying that the teeth would be interdependent without the lips. He believed that the three empresses of the demon realm, including his son who really controlled the demon realm, would understand this truth. Previously, on the battlefield in the Jin Yao territory, wasn't it because of this reason that Arthur stopped fighting with the three supreme angels? Regarding the uniting of the demons, all countries agreed, but all of them were quite cautious. When humans were at their most critical and weakest, would the demons really cooperate instead of being perfunctory with ulterior motives and secretly planning to take this opportunity to annex the human world in one fell swoop? After all, the feud between the two sides could not be resolved in a short time. No one could guarantee that they would not lead a wolf into the house. However, everyone was very clear that, based on the current situation, relying on the strength of humans to fight alone was basically a dead end. It was imperative that they work together. What was a little surprising was that shortly after Rex the Great sent envoys to the demon realm, he immediately received an accurate answer from the three empires of the demon realm. They agreed to cooperate and deal with the Abyss together. The demon realm would dispatch troops to the human world and join hands with humans to snipe the Abyss army in the White Sea. From the perspective of the human world, this was the second batch of troops sent by the demon realm after the last battle in the Lan Yao Kingdom. From the perspective of the demon realm, this time they truly joined forces with the human world because this time it was not just Chenrei's ancient legion, but a real demon's army. This meant that humans and demons cooperated for the first time in a real sense. Chapter 1238. The sky was clear and boundless. Squads of knights were leading their horses along the rugged mountain path. These knights were clad in uniform white light armor, and there was a unique mark of the Church of Light on their breastplates. It was obvious that they were Knights of Radiance. The Knights of Radiance were once the most revered knights in the human world. They had countless glory and halos, but now, they were like stray dogs, dejected and devoid of fighting spirit. Ever since the establishment of the Church of Light, they had encountered countless setbacks and disasters, but they had always been able to stand firm. However, in the Battle of White Cliff this time, everyone from the angels to the Pope and the Church had sacrificed themselves for the Church. This meant that the core of the Church of Light had been completely destroyed. It was like a person whose soul had been destroyed. Even if the flesh, blood, and bones were still present, they were nothing more than a walking corpse. After losing this soul, the radiance of the Knights of Radiance was no more. The leader of the Knights wiped the sweat off his face and shouted, "Hurry up! We'll see the port after we climb over this mountain. His Highness Palgris has prepared a ship for us there. His Highness Palgris has spent a lot of money to reserve a time slot for the teleportation portal, but we don't have much time. Within 3 days, all the teleportation portals in the Eastern Kingdom will be ineffective. If you want to live, follow them." These words made the knights quicken their pace. The teleportation portal could reach the Western continent directly. Once it was ineffective, they could only travel by sea. With the current situation, the White Sea had been sealed off by the human allied forces of the Western continent. Even if they could get their hands on a ship, they would not be able to cross the White Sea alive. The magical minefields and defensive formations alone were enough to kill them. The Knights of Radiance, named Dawn, were the permanent legion of the Tuli Kingdom. The Tuli Kingdom was a kingdom in the Eastern continent, adjacent to the Starlight Kingdom. It had been fawning on the Church of Light for many years. Although the Church of Light's territory was only average, it was ranked in the top 5 of the human kingdoms in terms of contribution. The number of Knights of Radiance stationed in the kingdom was also several times that of ordinary kingdoms. In fact, the Royal Highness Palgris, mentioned by the commander was the king of the Thule kingdom. After the Ryo Empire and other countries were destroyed by the abyss, many countries, including the Thule kingdom, were facing great danger. Palgrus bribed Rog, one of the 3 Grand Cardinals, and obtained the protection of the Dawn Knights to evacuate the kingdom together. However, on the way out, the Dawn Radiance Legion suddenly received news that White Cliff had been completely destroyed. This was like a bolt from the blue. The Radiance Knights immediately felt that they had lost their backbone and did not know what to do. Palgrus was also a cunning person. He immediately seized this opportunity and roped in the Dawn Legion's commander Duncan, wanting to take the opportunity to seize this armed force in his hands. The army of the Abyss had already invaded the Thule kingdom. It was only a matter of time before the kingdom was destroyed. As the king, he had lost everything. However, as long as he had the power, it was not impossible for him to make a comeback. Moreover, in such a chaotic situation, no matter where they fled to, strength was the only way to survive. For this, Palgrus did not hesitate to pay a huge price and use his connections to obtain the time to use the teleportation portal of the Starlight Kingdom so that he and the Radiant Knights could pass through. Of course, the prerequisite was the loyalty of the Radiant Knights. At present, there were not many Radiant Knights who had shown their loyalty, but Palgrus believed that as long as they reached the Starlight Kingdom and faced the teleportation portal, which was a choice between life and death, no one would make the wrong choice. The road ahead became more and more steep and rugged. Even Palgrus, who was carried by his personal guards, broke out in cold sweat after a few turns. It was not because he did not want to take the flat road, but because the latest intelligence showed that the speed of the Abyss army was astonishing. They actually bypassed the 2 cities in front of the Kingdom of Soya and the Thule Kingdom, and were heading straight for the capital. This forced Palgrus to move forward again, and the civilians who received the news also flocked to escape. The main road was full of fleeing refugees, and it was extremely congested. If they took the main road, their speed would be even slower. This small road led to a secret military port. There were enough ships prepared there, and they could reach Starlight City within 2 days. Even if the monsters attacked the capital faster than expected, the civilians on the main road could still become a natural barrier to stop the monsters. A young Radiant Knight accidentally slipped and fell to the ground. He could not help but burst into tears. The knights could not help but be stunned. The captain on the side waved his horsewhip and said angrily, "John! Stand up! How can there be a spineless Radiant Knight like you?" The young knight cried, "Captain, I'm not crying about this, but my sister is still in the capital. She's only 11 years old." The captain trembled, and the whip stopped falling. The young knight's sorrow quickly spread, and someone said, "My mother is also in the city. My wife and son haven't escaped far. For a moment, an atmosphere of sadness and helplessness spread and enveloped the entire army. Everyone's heart seemed to be filled with haze, and their footsteps involuntarily slowed down. Palgrus, who was in the middle of the team, immediately noticed the abnormality and shouted, "Everyone, hurry up! The abyssal monsters are not far behind, and if you delay any longer, you won't be able to leave. Survival is the most important thing." Palgrus's voice did not have much effect. At this time Duncan, who was at the front of the team, received the news. He jumped and flew into the air shouting, "What happened? Let's go! Lord Duncan!" The young knight from before, John, cried, "Please allow me to go back and protect my family." Duncan looked down at the knight, his eyes flashing with hostility, and he said coldly, "On the first day you joined the knights, I said that there is only one duty of a soldier, and that is to obey. No matter what reason you have, I only have one order: move forward." John gritted his teeth and raised his head. "My lord, we are Radiant Knights, and on the first day we became knights, our declaration." Before he could finish speaking, his chest had already been pierced by a powerful white light, and he immediately died. Duncan slowly retracted his hand and looked down coldly at the crowd, his eyes filled with killing intent. "Those who disobey will die." Duncan had been the Legion commander for many years, and he had accumulated a lot of prestige. Many people lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. Duncan knew that this was the time when people's hearts were the most shaken and had to be suppressed immediately. He shouted, "Eldara! Here!" A man flew out from the front and floated beside Duncan. It was his most capable assistant, Eldara. He was usually impartial, cold, and merciless, and had extremely high prestige in the army. "You are in charge of supervising the entire army. If anyone stops, behead them." "Yes." Just as Duncan was about to fly back, he suddenly felt a sense of alarm. Before he could react, his heart turned cold, and a sword had already pierced through him. The hilt of the sword was in Eldara's hand. Duncan looked at the bloody tip of the sword protruding from his chest in disbelief and gritted his teeth. "Eldara, you..." His most trusted and capable subordinate had actually pierced his heart with a sword from behind at this moment. This unforeseen event shocked everyone, including Palgris. The entire team stopped for a moment. Eldara's sword was surrounded by a cold aura. Before Duncan could finish speaking, his entire body had already quickly solidified. A moment later, he turned into an ice sculpture. The sword shook, and the entire ice sculpture shattered into pieces. Palgris was the fastest to react. He said bitterly, "Commander Eldara, please continue forward." This sentence was equivalent to acknowledging Eldara's new position. As a king, Palgris was no stranger to scheming for power. This Eldara had obviously planned for a long time to replace Duncan. Now that he had caught him off guard, he finally succeeded in one strike and succeeded in ascending to the throne. It seemed that he had to rope in this new commander as soon as possible. Eldara ignored Palgris and looked down coldly at all the knights. He said, "Who can tell me what a knight's declaration is?" The team was silent for a moment before someone answered. "I swear to treat the weak well." Someone continued, "I swear to fight against rape bravely. I swear to fight against all wrongs. I swear to fight for the defenseless. I swear to help anyone who asks me for help. I swear not to hurt any innocent. I swear to help my brother knight. I swear to treat my friends sincerely. I swear that I will never change my love until death." It seems that none of you have forgotten. Eldara clenched the sword in his hand and shouted, "Then, what have we done? In order to live in humiliation, we abandoned the faith in our hearts, abandoned the oaths we kept, and abandoned true glory. I don't know what will happen to our lives and dignity in this catastrophe. I only know that our family members and those defenseless civilians are facing the cruel monsters in the rear. As for us knights with swords, we can only escape in the front." The knights lowered their heads in shame, and many even began to cry. "The center of our faith has been destroyed, but we still have faith in our hearts. Even if it's just for our loved ones and those who need our help to buy a moment of time to evacuate." Eldara waved his sword and pointed at the blood-red sky behind him. "Radiant Knights! Eternal glory!" The knights below raised their swords and turned around. Palgris stared dumbfoundedly at the Radiant Knights who were retreating in unison, revealing an incomprehensible expression. Stupid lunatics! Perhaps His Highness would never understand this logic. There would always be some stupid people in this world. There would always be these stupid people in this world. Teray Kingdom. In front of the torrent of the abyss that crushed everything, groups of silver knights appeared. They went forward without hesitation. Compared to the torrent, they were so insignificant. However, under the sunlight they were so dazzling. This was the brilliance of life. True holiness and glory had always existed in people's hearts, not in the so-called temples. Chapter 1239. Groups of people rushed towards the teleportation portal like a flood. The teleportation portal was originally heavily guarded, but it was now empty, as the soldiers who were supposed to maintain order had retreated. The crowd pushed and shoved each other. Angry shouts, screams, and cries intertwined. Everyone wanted to rush into the teleportation portal as soon as possible and leave the dangerous eastern continent. Today was the last day of the teleportation portal's closure. Seeing that the light of the light portal was gradually dimming, almost everyone's eyes turned red, and they rushed forward recklessly. Under the crazy impact, they trampled on each other, wailing, and blood flowed on the ground. At this moment, it was not only their lives that were being crushed, but also their humanity. In the end, the light of the teleportation portal was completely extinguished, and so was everyone's hope. On the other side of the continent, Raymond, the general of the Long Huang Empire who commanded the soldiers to create despair, and the commander of the Sea Soul Legion of the human allied forces, looked at the destroyed teleportation portal in silence. He knew very well what his orders meant. The supreme commander of the human allied forces, Rex the Great, understood his old subordinate's feelings. He patted Raymond's shoulder and sighed. "It's not you, nor us who's wrong. It's this world, this era." Beside him, Rambus and Sandro nodded. Although the Rio Empire had been destroyed, Rambus still had loyal generals like Sandro and Altos by her side. She also had a large number of soldiers under her command. These soldiers were all elites, and even rarer, they had valuable experience in fighting against the Abyss. Rambus did not abandon her people at the last moment. She fought against the Abyss and successfully evacuated with most of the people. This made her reputation rise instead of fall. After returning to the Western continent, she was still highly regarded and became the first military advisor of the human allied forces. Sandro became the first commander of the most important White Sea defense line of the human allied forces. "Don't blame everything on the era, because it's us who created this era." A voice came from behind. Rambus looked at the person with a complicated look in her eyes. If not for those unforeseen events, she would have become his wife long ago. However, there were no ifs in this world. "Arthur!" Rex the Great's gaze was rather mixed as well. In terms of strength, even though he was the Emperor of the Holy Empire and the commander of the Allied armies, he did not have the right to speak before this person. This was because this person's strength had already far surpassed the level of ordinary life forms. He could only be looked up to, and only the few people at the very peak could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. However, no matter what, this person was his son. "Just call me Chenrui, father." Chenrui smiled faintly. He did not look at Rambus or Rex. Instead, his gaze fell on the person beside him. "Perhaps, what we can do is to use our own hands to create more hope. Michael." As it turned out, the person beside Chenrui was none other than Michael, the head of the 3 supreme angels who had died along with the destruction of White Cliff not long ago. Gabriel was beside Michael, but Raphael was no longer there. During the battle at White Cliff, Raphael sacrificed his life and used the power of faith accumulated at White Cliff to trigger the explosion of the Book of Creation. In the end, both his body and soul were destroyed. Of the 3 supreme angels, only 2 were left. Michael shook his head and said in a low voice, "Apart from hatred, we can no longer see anything else." This, we included Gabriel. Gabriel closed his eyes and maintained a kind of indifference, as if he did not hear the conversation between them at all. Chenrui could faintly sense that this indifference contained 2 completely different and complex auras. On one hand, it was like a flame that could ignite at any time. On the other hand, it was like ashes that had already been burned to ashes. "Whether it is hatred or hope, if the 3 lords of the abyss really have the strength that you say, these are just bubbles." The one who said this was another giant-level figure, Satan. On the other side were Rala, Catherine, Augustus, Paglio, Isabella. Except for the missing Ben Hong, almost all the super powerhouses of the demon realm were gathered here. It was the same for the surface world. With the previous lesson of the destruction of the eastern region, this time, the super powerhouses of the surface world understood that this was a real life and death situation. No one could stay out of it. Those who tried to stay out of it would only end up dead. With the precedent of White Cliff, the dragons did not dare to be negligent. They quickly evacuated from Ryuzuku and came to the Island of Storms through the teleportation portal. They temporarily lived in the alchemy civilization, surface world base, that Chenrui had built. This time, they sent a large number of combat forces, led by Palgrize, to the west bank of the White Sea. The elves and dwarves suffered heavy losses in the Battle of the Blue Brilliance Empire. They reorganized their military forces and dispatched 3 legions. The orcs also sent the strongest Behemoth Legion to join the elves' army. On the side of the Demon Realm, the alliance of the 3 empires sent the real elite legion, with Catherine as the first commander and Geraint as the deputy commander, to the surface world. The number of legions dispatched by the City of Stars was far more than the previous time. The lost troops were also quickly rebuilt using various resources. The destruction of the eastern continent of the surface world was already unstoppable. The abyssal monsters would definitely attack the western continent. The best barrier to resist the abyssal army was the natural stronghold of the White Sea. It was conceivable that there would be a most intense battle at that time. Not only the abyssal monsters, but the 3 dominators were also likely to appear. Michael did not refute Satan as usual. Instead, he looked gloomy and said, "In terms of individual strength, we are indeed no match for the 3 dominators. In the Battle of White Cliff, I, Gabriel, Raphael, and Lega used the power of faith of the Holy Mountain and the Book of Creation to desperately cast the Great Light Sword formation on Sasbak, but we all failed in the end." Even the Great Light Sword formation couldn't suppress Sasbak? Satan frowned. He obviously knew the power of the Great Light Sword formation. To be precise, it's an incomplete form of the Great Light Sword formation. A diamond-shaped golden crystal appeared in Michael's hand. The crystal was full of cracks. "I used 1/3 of the power of faith accumulated in the Holy Mountain as the price and asked Lager to help complete this sword formation. Unfortunately, it wasn't in its complete state at that time. It couldn't even exert half of its power. In the end, it was defeated by Sasbak with an arrow from the Scarlet Flame Bow." "Wait a minute." Satan's eyes narrowed. "If we can repair and complete this sword formation, perhaps we still have a fighting chance." Michael shook his head. "Even if it can be repaired, the Book of Creation that powers it has already fallen into the hands of the Abyss. It's not necessarily only the power of creation that can power the Great Light Sword formation." Satan's eyes shone brightly. "Don't forget, there's still the destruction." Michael's eyes lit up, but Satan's gaze fell on Chenrei. Chenrei understood what Satan meant and nodded. "I can give you that page of the Book of Destruction." What they needed the most now was to strengthen their side. Everything else could be ignored. Satan's eyes flashed, and he nodded. The current elven prophet, Zelania, frowned and asked Michael, "Sir Michael, I would like to ask a question. Is the Scarlet Flame Bow that you mentioned just now one of the 3 elven bows? In the elven race, the Scarlet Flame Bow has been missing for some time, and only those recognized by the elven bloodline can use it. Why can Sasbak use it? It is indeed the Scarlet Flame Bow, but it should have been eroded by the power of the Abyss. As for Sasbak, he appeared in front of us with the body of a half-elf." As Michael spoke, his finger drew a golden light and revealed the appearance of Sasbak when he first came to the White Cliff. Zelania saw the appearance of this half-elf and blurted out, "Saul! Who is Saul?" This time, it was Chenrei who asked the question. Zelania glanced at Chenrei. "He is the husband of Queen Liv's cousin, Princess Nancy, and also Blanche's father." "Blanche's father!" Chenrei was shocked. He remembered that Blanche once said that her father went to the Plain of Nightmares to look for the Spring of Life to save the Tree of Nature, but unfortunately fell into the Nightmare Volcano and died without a corpse. Unexpectedly, this dead, missing person turned into the Lord of Fear and destroyed the Holy Mountain of Light. Blanche became the Lord of Hatred, and her father became the Lord of Fear. Was there any connection or mystery between them? Right, the Scarlet Flame Bow happened to be lost at that time. Zelania recalled for a while and said, "Did Saul steal the Scarlet Flame Bow?" "Miss Zelania." Chenrei thought for a while and said, "I also have a question to ask. The Abyss seems to have a close relationship with the elves. When Michael and I fought with Quiriana, she happened to be in the area of the half-elf graveyard and seemed to have suffered some strange injuries. Also, 20,000 years ago, Quiriana deliberately tried to break through the elves and even spent a lot of power to infect the Tree of Nature, creating the chaos of the elves. The abyss and the elves have no direct relationship. Surprisingly, it was not Zelania who answered this question, but Satan. It's just because the location of the fairy capital of Silver Moon is special. This location is a battlefield in the past. It's not a coincidence that the fairy capital of Silver Moon is located there. Chenrei understood a little and said, "So, the reason why the fairy capital of Silver Moon is located in the Jadeite Forest Sea is that the Moonlight Goddess deliberately set it up to suppress some residual power left in the battlefield? So, the elves have become the focus of the abyss? If there is the blessing of the Moonlight Goddess, this problem naturally does not exist. Unfortunately." Zelania sighed and did not stay on this topic. She changed her tone and said, "If it is confirmed that the Lord of Fear has fused with Saul's soul, then even if the scarlet flame bow is eroded by the power of the abyss, it is still the power of the elves' artifact and can be targeted to restrain it. Because we have one of the three strongest bows, the bow of the Moonlight Cloud Sea. Although the fairy capital has been destroyed, the artifact has its own power and has not been destroyed. The last time Princess Fei Li evacuated from the Kingdom of Blue Brilliance, she went to the ruins of the fairy capital and found this bow." Michael nodded, then shook his head and said, "That's right, but Princess Fei Li's power is too weak. She can't fight against Sosbak at all." "That's right. The bow of the Moonlight Cloud Sea is the inheritance treasure of the Elf Empress. Normally, only real elves can use it. Even the half-elves can't use its power. However, there is a kind of person who can use it." Zelania revealed a confident look and her gaze fell on Chenrui. "That is the person who is recognized by the Tree of Nature." Chapter 1240. The Human World. It had been 3 months since the Eastern Continent's teleportation portal was sealed. Even though the teleportation portal was sealed, and the White Sea had also established a unified defense line, there were still many humans crossing the sea in an attempt to escape to the Western Continent. The guards on the western shore of the White Sea did not completely cut off the escape route of these fugitives. They set up a special navigation fleet to guide the fugitives through the defensive zone. However, the White Sea was too large, and the environment in the deep sea was very harsh. The proportion of the fugitives that could reach the navigation fleet was relatively small. No one knew how many people died in the fierce waves, but no matter what, there was a chance of survival. A few days ago, many ships managed to reach the west coast of the White Sea safely under the guidance of the navigation fleet. However, as time passed, the navigation fleet encountered fewer and fewer ships, indicating that the situation in the eastern continent was worsening. Over the past 3 months, the allied forces of humans and demons had made a lot of arrangements and preparations. They had built a unified defense along the coastline, and through screening and training, they had formed a joint navy in the shortest time possible. The east coast of the White Sea. The land by the shore was covered in a blinding blood-red hue. Even the clouds in the sky and the nearby waters were dyed red. An endless army of monsters crowded together, their roars and howls filling the entire space. These abyssal monsters occupied the coast, which was the last lifeline, indicating that all humans in the eastern continent had basically lost their way. Even though the abyssal monsters were extremely powerful, they could not cross the vast White Sea by force. The White Sea was extremely vast, incomparable to the small sea in the Nightmare Plain. An ordinary ship would need a few months to cross the sea. Even the fiery sorceress and the Lord of the Abyss, who had the ability to fly, would not be able to fly to the west without stepping on solid ground. The only exception was the Supra monsters. However, it was not a simple flight, but a war. The allied forces of humans were currently waiting for the enemy to exhaust themselves. They had set up countless defense lines and traps in the sea. Advancing recklessly would be equivalent to entering deep into the enemy's territory alone. They would lose their greatest advantage in numbers, and would also expend a lot of energy along the way, which would allow them to be easily killed by the human powerhouses. If Quiriana were to personally make a move and use the power that could cool the ocean and turn it into land, it would cost her a lot of energy, not to mention whether it would work on the vast White Sea. It seemed that Baihai had given the abyss a huge problem. Unfortunately, things were not that simple. They saw a series of wriggling movements in the group of monsters. Strange objects were pushed out and fell into the sea. Many blood-colored ships. The surface of the strange and terrifying ship was squirming with skin-like blood-red veins. They undulated and contracted slightly as if they were breathing. The skeleton of the main body was real bones. Spine, leg bones, skull, all kinds of bones were mixed together. It was obvious that these bones came from human corpses. Each ship represented the destruction of countless lives. After the blood boat entered the water, the abyssal monsters jumped onto the boat one after another. The boat seemed to have a life of its own and didn't need a special pilot. It automatically moved forward. More and more blood ships appeared, carrying batches of abyssal monsters into the White Sea. In the eastern waters of the White Sea, the magical eyes on the lighthouses immediately discovered the monsters that had entered their range. They immediately reported back to the intelligence department of the Western continent. Correspondingly, the Navy on the western shores of the White Sea and the naval bases in the middle of the sea began to take action. Unlike land, the mobilization of the army could not be completed in a day. After receiving the information that the Abyss army was crossing the sea, the blockade and magical barriers of the sea were activated. After sailing for 7 days, the Abyss army finally encountered the first line of defense set up by the Allied army. Boom! The sound of an explosion came from the surface of the water, causing a pillar of water to rise into the sky. One of the blood ships was torn apart by the terrifying explosion. More than half of the monsters on the ship died, and many of them fell into the cold water. The monsters that could not climb onto the nearby ships in time gradually sank into the sea. The force of the explosion was so great that even the hulls of the 2 nearby blood ships were torn apart, revealing white bones. However, the blood ships seemed to have a certain degree of regenerative ability, and they began to heal themselves. Boom, 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 a series of explosions rang out, and another blood ship was blown up and sunk. This was the most commonly used defensive weapon in naval battles, the floating mine. The floating mine floated on the surface of the water, and would explode upon being triggered. The power of the explosion was quite shocking. Even though the blood ships had a certain degree of regenerative ability, they were still unable to defend themselves after being triggered, and many of them were blown up. Just like in a land battle, the Abyss army did not stop, and continued to sail forward. The continuous explosions seemed to have triggered some kind of magic array. Strange ripples appeared on the surface of the water, and rays of light shot out. After hitting one of the blood boats, they seemed to be refracted and hit another one, and so on. Countless rays of light intertwined to form a huge pattern. These rays of light did not have any destructive power, and were only used for positioning. About 10 seconds later, the real magic formation was triggered. The seawater began to spin rapidly, and a huge whirlpool with a diameter of 1,000 meters appeared. All the blood ships within the previously positioned area were sucked into the whirlpool, and were quickly devoured. Many powerful abyssal monsters, such as the Inferno Sorceress and the Abyssal Lord, rose into the air, and some even launched powerful attacks at the whirlpool. However, most of the fleet was still devoured by the whirlpool. In fact, it was not the power of the magic formation itself, but the ocean. The real function of the magic formation was not to attack, but to trigger the power of nature of the ocean that had been accumulating for a long time, and create such an astonishing whirlpool. In the ocean, the softest water had the greatest power. As an environment of war, the ocean itself could destroy the enemies without having to do anything. That was the specialty of naval battles. However, after the defense line was triggered, it also lost its function, and could no longer cause any damage or threat. Even though more than half of the vanguard troops had been devoured, the blood ships still maintained their original speed and continued to move forward, not affected by the destruction of their companions at all. At the same time, in the command center of an island, an intelligence officer reported, "General, the enemy has appeared in the East 27 seas. They have already triggered the Whirlpool defense line and the Water Dragon defense line. Commander Sandro pondered for a moment. Report the time between the two defense lines being triggered. In an hour. Sandro thought for a while and said, It seems like the enemy is faster than we expected. They should be able to reach the ice defense line in about 50 minutes. Order the first fleet to set off immediately, and attack the Abyss troops after they pass the ice defense line. The second and third fleets will set off in 30 minutes and intercept the Abyss troops in batches. Pay attention to the level and formation of the army. Yes. Next to Sandro was Gerent, the second commander of the Demon Realm Coalition army. He nodded secretly. This human general is really extraordinary. He estimated the sailing speed of the Abyss fleet from the time difference between the two defense lines being triggered. The timing of dispatching his own fleet is also very meticulous. The interception of the second and third fleets is even more ingenious. They can break the enemy into parts and offset the endless nature of the Abyss army to the greatest extent. Hey, I say, it doesn't have to be so troublesome. Paglio, who was next to him, took a sip of wine and scratched his head. Can't we just send a pseudo-god powerhouse to wipe them out directly? For example, a madwoman who is proficient in 6 elements can even clear the screen with a few magic spells. Isabella shook her head and said, The Abyss monsters are endless. Even if Rala keeps killing them, she can't kill them all. It's just delaying the speed of the Abyss army. It's meaningless. The real source is the 3 rulers. If the 3 rulers can be defeated, the Abyss army will naturally collapse without a fight. In terms of high-level strength, we are in a disadvantageous situation. Now, we can only stop them with silence and maximize the use of tactics to compete with the opponent. The pseudo-god powerhouses, including Churui, Rala, and Michael, can't waste any power, and can't easily expose themselves. We must wait patiently and lure the ruler on the Abyss side to take the initiative to appear. Only then will we have a chance of winning. Madam Ant, you don't have to explain. Someone's IQ has always been negative. It's useless to say it. It was Lomond who added insult to injury. No wonder sometimes even Duo can't beat demon fighting chess. Paglio's face darkened. He glanced at Lomond with disdain and retorted, Your IQ is only positive when you see widows or wives. Shut up, you 2 bastards. This is the headquarters, not a market. Delia, who couldn't bear it anymore, dragged the 2 guys out. East 27th Sea. The surface of the sea had frozen. The freezing appeared suddenly, and it was spreading rapidly. Many blood ships were frozen and couldn't sail normally. Many lords of the Abyss jumped off and broke the ice with their giant swords. Before they could break the ice, the light in the sky suddenly dimmed. A dark cloud quickly spread in the distance. Upon closer inspection, one could see that it was a giant metal humanoid, Construct War Puppets. The Construct War Puppets didn't dive down to attack. Instead, they maintained their altitude and threw bombs down. The blood boats had not completely recovered from the frozen state, so they were moving slowly. There was no way for them to dodge. In the dense rain of bombs, a large area exploded. In addition to the damage caused by the explosion itself, the huge waves set off by the aftermath also capsized many blood boats outside the frozen sea. The Abyss army naturally didn't want to be attacked like this. The Lords of the Abyss and the fiery witches nearby all rose into the sky and faced the Construct War Puppets. However, the Construct War Puppets didn't want to fight. After throwing a round of bombs, they immediately retreated. The Lords of the Abyss and the fiery witches chased after them. Some of their attacks even shot down some Construct War Puppets. However, the Construct War Puppets didn't look back. They just flew straight ahead. After the Lords of the Abyss and the fiery witches were lured away, the blood ships that were frozen by the frozen defense line had yet to be completely unfrozen. However, the Alliance fleet had already appeared in the distance. The magic crystal cannons were all aimed at the targets that couldn't move normally. Airships loaded with bombs slowly rose from the rear of the fleet. For the blood ships that had lost the ability to control the air, these relatively slow airships were the most dreadful gods of death. The lords of the abyss and the fiery witches who were chasing the construct war puppets seemed to have sensed that something was wrong. When they were about to go back to help, a group of giant dragons suddenly appeared and blocked their way. In the distance, more construct war puppets rose from an enormous mothership. The Battle of the White Sea, which concerned the fate of the entire world, had officially begun. Chapter 1241. In the air, the construct puppets in a battle formation opened fire at the same time. Countless missiles whistled toward the Lord of the Abyss and the fiery sorceresses who were surrounded. Under the intensive attack, the Lord of the Abyss and the fiery sorceresses had no time to react and were blown into pieces. A few super elites still managed to escape from such a powerful attack. An elite Lord of the Abyss who was in the middle stage of demigod flashed and appeared in front of the construct puppet. When he was about to launch a fatal attack with his huge sword, he suddenly sensed danger. He saw a saint dragon in front of him. There was only one saint dragon in his sight, and he breathed out dragon breath with white flames. The Lord of the Abyss didn't have time to dodge. He yelled and slashed down with his sword. Under that terrifying sharp energy, the dragon breath was cut in half. The saint dragon had already expected this. When he breathed out dragon breath, he had already rushed up and lashed out with his tail like a huge whip. The Lord of the Abyss had just cut the dragon breath, and it was at the moment when its strength was exhausted. It couldn't defend with all its strength, and was sent flying. Xinglong's figure turned into human form and caught up to the Lord of the Abyss who had lost its balance in midair. The weapon in his hand that looked like brass knuckles with a sharp edge at the tip split into two. As the cold air surged, the tough body of the Lord of the Abyss was actually split into two. As his hands moved like lightning, the body of the Lord of the Abyss was split into pieces and fell straight down. The saint dragon who killed the Lord of the Abyss so easily was Groa's. Looking at the new weapon in his hand, Isaac's, he was pleasantly surprised. Groa's was not only surprised by the weapon, but also by his own strength. If he had faced the Lord of the Abyss who was also in the middle stage of demigod on the battlefield of the Blue Brilliance Empire a few months ago, he wouldn't have been able to kill an enemy of the same level so quickly even with this powerful weapon. This was thanks to Maria's magical son-in-law, Chunrei. After receiving the power of star-level enhancement, although there was a scary situation where his strength regressed for a month, after that, his foundation had been unprecedentedly consolidated and refined. His strength had also increased a lot. He had only broken through to middle-stage demigod not long ago, and it would take him at least 100 years or more to advance further. However, he could vaguely feel that he was on the verge of breaking through now. However, Maria and Span were faster than him, having already reached the peak of the demigod realm. And this was only a 1-star strengthening. If it could be upgraded to a 2-star strengthening, its power would soar once again. It was said that it was not impossible for it to break through to the demigod realm. Maria's two daughters, Rala and Isabella, were the best examples. Rala's power was already inconceivably on par with Michael, while Isabella's power was not even at the demigod realm when she was in Ryuzaku. Now, she was only a step away from the demigod realm. Chunrei was the creator of miracles. Groa's thought was only fleeting, and he quickly went back to the battle. This time, the dragons he led were not the Demon Overlord and Demon Emperor level rookies in the battle in the Jinyao territory, but the true super elites of Ryuzaku. Soon, this batch of Abyss, Air Force, was wiped out. The assembled puppets that completed the task returned to the huge ship, and quickly replenished energy and repaired damaged parts. During the whole battle, this ship itself did not launch an attack. It was just a base for loading combat weapons, but it played an irreplaceable and important role. If there were transmigrators from Earth who came to this world and saw this huge ship, they would definitely exclaim. The battle on the sea was also coming to an end. The airships in the sky, with the cooperation of the fleet's magic crystal cannons, used the magic bombs to deliver a fatal blow to the blood ships. There were fewer and fewer blood ships on the sea, and they were finally all gone. This contact battle did not last long. It could be described as a complete victory. The battle of humans against the Abyss basically ended in complete defeat. Even the Battle of the Blue Glory Empire was considered a Pyrrhic victory. It was the first time they won such a victory, so their morale was greatly boosted. The key to the victory of this battle was actually not this battlefield, but the battlefield of the Second and Third Fleets. These two fleets were composed of demons, humans, and alchemy legions. The commander was the same person, General Neo of the Shadow Empire. Neo was not one of the three generals of the Dark Shadow Empire, but a young man newly promoted by Catherine the Great. As the wisest person in the Demon Realm and the supreme commander of the Demon Realm Coalition Army, Catherine brought this rookie general to the human world and entrusted him with such a heavy responsibility. It was really shocking. However, it was this rookie, Neo, who showed amazing commanding skills in this key battle against the Abyss Army. The command and deployment of various long-range and melee troops, as well as the grasp of battlefield timing, were extremely skillful, as if he was a famous general who had commanded countless battles. He did not look like a rookie at all. In particular, his kiting tactic of fighting while running away was an eye-opener. The Abyss fleet wanted to fight desperately, but their fists never landed on the ground. They could only be continuously consumed in the pursuit. The entire fleet's formation was also scattered, and they could no longer be continuous, as before. It was precisely because of this that the First Fleet could take down a large batch of Abyss blood ships so easily. Old Marshal Altos of the Blue Glory Empire was also on the command ship. He couldn't help but gasp in amazement at Neo's abilities. He was also amazed by the demon soldiers' execution and agility on the battlefield. They were like wily old foxes who had fought countless battles against the Abyss. They could always inflict the greatest number of casualties on the enemy with the smallest price. In fact, this Neo had another title in the Demon Realm, the Dungeon King. In Endless Warrior Online, Neo was fully deserving of his title as the #1 commander. He was also the record holder for many Abyss dungeons, including this Sea Dungeon. At the same time, he was publicly recognized as the best commander in monster sieges. Endless Warrior Online was developed in the Demon Realm only a few years earlier than the humans. The biggest difference was that the demons' passion for the game, and the importance the Demon Realm Empire placed on it. The difference was far greater than the humans. They were both fighting against the Abyss, but the demons were far superior to the humans in terms of individual ability and tactics. After the vanguard suffered an unexpected and devastating blow, the Abyss fleet behind them finally changed. More and more blood ships gathered together, and quickly twisted and overlapped. The bones and bloody skin merged into one, forming the vague outline of an enormous strange ship. Not only did the fusion require a large number of blood ships, but a large number of Abyss monsters had also turned into magma and merged into the strange ship. As more and more blood ships merged into the ship, the size of the strange ship increased further. When it finally took shape, it was actually the size of 4 football fields, and its appearance was strange and sinister. Apart from the increase in size and capacity, the bones that made up the ship also became unusually sturdy. The warships of the Third Fleet were the first to discover this giant ship. However, even powerful magic crystal cannons could only leave a small hole or crack on this giant ship. For a ship as large as this, an attack of this degree posed no threat at all. Moreover, the crack would automatically repair itself. Not only did the Abyss giant ship possess powerful defense, it could also spit fireballs that matched the range of the magic crystal cannons. What was even more terrifying was that apart from the original monsters, there was a new type of huge creature on the giant ship. It was brownish-red in color, looked a bit like a sunflower, and had a circle of long tentacles around its body. It was the Abyssal Mother. This wasn't the end of the terror of the giant ship with the Abyssal Mother. Everywhere it passed, the fish and living creatures in the sea turned into dry bones. It seemed to be constantly devouring the surrounding life to obtain more power. At the same time, sparkling red flowers bloomed around the Abyssal Mother. The mother's mouth would also spit out blood cocoons covered in mucus. These blood cocoons would soon hatch into new abyssal monsters. Although the abyssal flower's buff had a time limit, it could still greatly increase the strength of the abyssal monsters. For a time, the Third Fleet's casualties suddenly increased. What gave Neo the biggest headache was that no matter what tactics he used, he couldn't deal a decisive blow to this giant ship with the abyssal mother's nest. The giant ship with absolute power was basically unstoppable. The abyss blood ships at the back were still merging with the new giant ship. This was definitely bad news. All Neo could do was mobilize a portion of his warships to distract the giant ship and do his best to slow down its advance. While Neo was commanding the Third Fleet to do its best to outflank the enemy, he suddenly received a new order: retreat. Seeing the Allied fleet retreating, the abyss blood ships surrounded the giant ship and chased after it. It was at this moment that a giant ship no smaller than the abyss giant ship appeared in front of them. It was the First Fleet's mothership that carried the construct puppets. When the Third Fleet passed by the mothership, they actually disappeared one after another. Then, the waves around the mothership started surging up and down. The giant waves it created were so huge that even the abyss giant ship was pushed back. An incomparably huge shadow gradually rose into the air. The mothership of the Allied army had revealed its true appearance. The part that had appeared out of the water just now was just a small part of it. The enormous fortress body was even bigger than the abyss giant ship. Its entire body flashed with metallic silver light. This giant mothership didn't stop rising and actually floated in the air. The abyss giant ship fired a barrage of fireballs at the giant mothership, but the mothership instantly disappeared before it could even touch its target. The next second, an enormous figure appeared in the distant sky like a proud dragon looking down at the beasts on the ground. At this distance, the giant ship wouldn't be able to hit it even if it had twice the range. But that didn't mean that the giant mothership couldn't attack it. A golden beam of light shot out, drew a straight golden line in the void, and accurately fell on the abyssal battleship. The giant ship, which even the magic crystal cannons could only damage, was easily penetrated by this golden light. The parts that were touched, whether it was the skeleton hull or the abyssal monsters, all turned into particles and dissipated. The entire giant ship was torn apart in the blink of an eye. The broken parts were still rapidly decomposing and couldn't be restored at all. Whether it was the range or the power of this attack, it was terrifying. When Sandro and the others in the command center saw this scene from the magic eye on the battlefield, they were all shocked. The demon realm actually has such a terrifying weapon. If the demons used this thing in the Battle of Jinyao territory, even a genius general like Sandro couldn't imagine how the humans could resist it. This horror fell into the eyes of Paglio and Lomont. The two guys who were strangling each other just now showed a smug smile at the same time. The mothership was the Starlight transformed from the ancient civilization's capital, the City of Stars. The shot just now was one of the three main cannons of the Starlight. It could destroy defenses and enchantments to the greatest extent. Break. Chapter 1242. The star floated in the air and looked down at the enemies on the surface of the sea. The shining golden light finally stopped. The huge Mother Nest ship had long since collapsed, and the originally densely packed formation of the Blood Fleet seemed to be fragmented. Many flying abyssal monsters flew toward the star brilliance, but the star brilliance was unmoved. Another indifferent light that had been brewing for a long time was ejected. The target was not the Flaming Witch or the Abyss Lord, but the densely packed abyssal blood ships on the sea. This indifferent light was not as gorgeous and dazzling as the golden light. However, when this light touched a blood ship, it suddenly exploded, and a huge black hole appeared. The black hole swallowed everything around it, including a huge amount of seawater and countless blood ships. This was one of the three main cannons of the Star Brilliance. It was a large-scale attack black hole similar to the enhanced version of Star Devourer, Clang. The black hole continued. The abyssal blood ships were constantly being swallowed, and a large amount of blank space appeared. After Garatum solved the source of the rule energy, the Star Brilliance had a steady stream of super energy. The current reserve was quite amazing. The consumption of this kind of main cannon attack was simply a drop in the bucket. In terms of power, it could also be safely opened to the maximum power. At this time, the Flaming Witch and the Abyss Lord in the air had quickly flown over. The silver armor of the Star Brilliance had already rotated and turned over, revealing the densely packed cannons. All the defensive cannons were controlled by gremlin servants who were the best at manipulating. There were millions of gremlin servants. Although their own combat power was low, they were an indispensable multifunctional unit in the entire City of Stars. Not only could they repair and manufacture mechanical equipment and biological buildings, but they could also control various weapons in the City of Stars. The mutated excellent gremlin could even construct puppets and become construct warriors, exerting a powerful combat power that was n times their own. The cannons fired together, and thousands of rays of light shone. Although the power of these rays was not as good as clang and shatter, they were far above the magic crystal cannons. Besides, they did not have the shortcoming of the long cooldown time like the magic crystal cannons. The firing frequency was quite fast, and the efficiency was even more amazing. The abyssal monsters were shot into pieces and sieves before they even got close. On the deck of the Star Brilliance, when it was previously in the form of a mother ship, a group of Titans appeared at the same time. Countless lightning crisscrossed in the space, clearing all the fish that escaped the net. After the black hole disappeared, the blood-red color could no longer be seen in that part of the sea. After a long while, the blood ships at the back finally arrived one after another. Even though the blood ships still looked endless, they were clearly no longer as oppressive as before when facing a powerful existence like the star that possessed an ultimate weapon. No matter how many ants there were, they could bite an elephant to death, but they could not bite an untouchable goshawk to death. Of course, although the Star Brilliance was close to the highest level 6 Imperial capital, it was not a level 6 Imperial capital. Furthermore, even the ancient alchemy civilization dimension, which had more than one level 6 Imperial capital, was destroyed by the Abyss in the end. The combination of geographical factors and tactics was the most important factor in the current situation of absolute suppression. At this time, the First Fleet and the Second Fleet appeared again and used their previous tactics to tear apart the Abyss Bloodship fleet. On the ocean, the abyssal monsters were unable to display the speed and absolute group advantage that they had on land. The giant mother nest ships that they had painstakingly built were destroyed by the main cannon of the Star one after another. They could only be led by the nose, and the Allied forces once again had the upper hand. After a new round of blood ships was cleared, the blood ships at the back did not continue moving forward. A strange atmosphere suddenly appeared in the air. The soldiers on the Allied forces simultaneously felt a huge pressure in their hearts. The morale and hope that had been raised because of the victory suddenly fell, and despair inexplicably arose in their hearts. Immediately after, a massive vortex appeared out of thin air in the waters of the Allied forces. The appearance of this vortex was very sudden, and it was extremely powerful. The ships of the Allied forces could not dodge in time and were devoured by this vortex. From the position of the Star Brilliance, the surface of the sea was vaguely a massive human face, and the vortex was a huge open mouth. Just as the First and Third Fleets were about to be devoured, the Star Brilliance shot out a dazzling purple pillar of light and struck the vortex. It was one of the 3 main cannons that could cause powerful damage to soul-type or invisible enemies, telekinesis. The whirlpool trembled, and its devouring power immediately weakened. Many of the ships that had just been devoured were spat out again. The human faces twisted, and their facial features became blurry as they gradually melted into the water. The soldiers of the fleet felt that the despair from before had weakened a lot. After receiving the order to retreat immediately, they followed the receding water and retreated at full speed. The abnormal movements of the sea did not truly calm down. A moment later, a huge water screen rose from the surface of the sea, and the facial features of a human face slowly protruded from the center of the water screen. Its huge eyes emitted a faint blue light, and there was a faint trace of blood red in them. This pair of eyes was extremely terrifying. Some soldiers accidentally looked at those eyes, and the despair in their hearts suddenly increased tenfold. They could not bear it, and jumped into the sea to commit suicide. In order to cover the escape of the warships, the Star Brilliance immediately launched an attack on the human face. The three main cannons, annihilation, telekinesis, were fired one after another. At first, the power of the three main cannons could still pose a certain threat, but the attack effect became weaker as time went on. To be more precise, the power of the human face was getting stronger and stronger. In front of the water screen, the black hole of annihilation could not even devour a drop of water. It was like a decoration. Annihilation could penetrate the water screen, but it did not have the slightest effect of destroying it. Only telekinesis had a certain effect, but it could only make the water screen slightly blurry and reduce the aura of despair to a certain extent. The human face did not pay attention to the fleeing warships. Its cold eyes fell on the Star Brilliance in the distant sky. The space around the Star Brilliance began to slowly distort, and the central control center in the city immediately sounded an alarm that it was under attack. A transparent round shield appeared outside the Star Brilliance. It was the law energy shield with the strongest defensive power. However, the pressure of the surrounding space was getting stronger and stronger, and the energy of the law energy shield began to rapidly decrease. The energy replenishment could not keep up with the speed of consumption. Seeing that it could not maintain the defensive shield, the Star Brilliance shot out a purple telekinesis at the last moment of the shield's collapse. The human face showed a look of contempt and let the purple light hit its face. However, the disdainful look immediately froze. The whole face suddenly broke into pieces, and the water screen also disappeared. On the sea, 6 people appeared. They were Chenrui, Michael, Gabriel, Satan, Rala, and the man who was surrounded in the middle. The man had a strong body, short black hair, and the part where the scarus should have been was blood red. His pupils were blue, and his facial features were very deep. His whole body was covered with exoskeleton-like armor. The man looked at the cracked armor on his body, and his eyes were still full of contempt. "Cunning ant, do you think you can sneak attack me like this? Delothro, today is the day you die," Michael said coldly. At the same time, his body shone with crystal light. This man was one of the 3 masters of the abyss, the Lord of Despair, Delothro. The purpose of the last blow of the Star Brilliance just now was not to attack but to teleport. In addition to killing souls, telekinesis of the 3 main cannons also had the magical function of teleportation. It could teleport its own people to the shooting position unharmed through the main cannon. The damage of the Star Brilliance obviously attracted the attention of the big fish, Delothro. After confirming the appearance of Delothro, the Star Brilliance launched the long-prepared 5 people of Chenrui. Although the joint attack did not kill Delothro, it made him suffer a small loss. Michael, Gabriel, and Rala formed a triangular formation, reflecting the dazzling crystal light. It looked like a huge crystal. In the crystal, a dark red light appeared in the hands of Satan. His whole body gradually became illusory, fusing with the crystal, and it looked like a huge clock. Chenrui's body shone with purple starlight, which was particularly conspicuous in the disk, but it was not superfluous. He gave people the feeling that he was a whole, like a bridge, perfectly combining the power of the crystal and the disk. If this formation was a huge clock, then Chenrui was the needle on the clock, grasping the pulse of the universe. Feeling the power of this formation, Delothro's face suddenly changed. He shouted, making the first move, and used his best soul shock. The invisible soul shock was so powerful that it was almost materialized. All the seawater on the surface of the sea turned back, and the fish and sea beasts hiding in the deep sea were turned into powder in the violent turbulence of the waves. However, the huge clock, jointly cast by the 6 people, just trembled and was actually fine. The next second, Delothro felt that his mind was shaken as if the needle on the huge clock had moved for a moment. At the same time, a sense of danger came from his heart. Delothro wanted to avoid it, but the opponent's attack was as traceless as the passing of time. Under the mysterious power, it was simply unavoidable. He could only put his hands together, shrink his body into a ball, and put on a defensive posture. The crystal light shone, revealing countless sharp chi, surrounded Delothro in it, and spun. The seawater below instantly turned into thousands of strands as if it was cut by countless sharp blades. It was a spectacle. Soon, the seawater returned to its original state, and Delothro slowly loosened his hands. At this time, the form of the Despair Lord had changed. His body size doubled, and the keratin and exoskeleton on his body surface turned into full-body armor. Sharp horns and bone spurs protruded from his head and shoulders, and a tail appeared behind him. All Abyss Lords had the ability to transform. They could transform into a stronger Abyss form, and their strength would be greatly improved. The only difference was that the strongest Quiriana could transform twice, while Delothro and Sasbak could only transform once. Delothro looked at his body in shock. Under the huge threat just now, he transformed into the Abyss form without thinking, but even so, his body that was wrapped in armor was still cut by the chi, and some of the wounds were so deep that his bones could be seen. Great Light Sword Array? Book of Destruction? Without the power of God bless, you can actually use the Great Light Sword Array to such an extent. Delothro's eyes narrowed, and the wounds on his body began to heal quickly. Finally, they completely recovered without a trace, as if he had never been injured. This kind of self-healing body was somewhat similar to the physique of Raphael and Charlie. It was quite difficult to deal with, but the premise was the support of power. As long as Delothro's power was completely destroyed, he could be killed. No wonder you are the weakest Abyss Lord. Michael seemed to deliberately imitate Raphael's poisonous tongue. It was just a tentative attack. The next blow will completely shatter you. Delothro smiled, revealing his white sharp teeth. Making people feel hope and then completely despair is my favorite. Let's not talk about whether this sword array can really kill me. Let me kindly remind you that I'm not alone this time. Chapter 1243. As soon as Delothro finished his words, a blood-red light came straight from the sky. It contained a powerful destructive power, and the space along the way was shattered. Red flame bow! Michael gritted his teeth and growled. He was not familiar with this kind of power. It was unforgettable. In the holy mountain of light, it was such an arrow that destroyed the great light sword array that he, Gabriel, and Raphael jointly cast. In the end, Raphael died, and the holy mountain of light that they had painstakingly built for many years was completely destroyed. Now, the same great light sword array faced such an attack from the red flame bow again. What would the result be? The speed of the light was extremely fast. Before Michael spoke, it had already torn the sky like lightning. However, when Michael blurted out, the light hadn't reached the great light sword array yet. On the clock of the great light sword array, the hand moved again and went back 1 square. This movement was obviously made after all the power, but everyone had a feeling that the arrow arrived first even though it was launched later. It was as if the order of time was reversed. Yes, it was time. Time was slowing down. Just like the change of the hand, it went back. Under the mystery of this, going back, the arrow still hadn't reached them yet. The hand of the clock moved again, and went forward 1 square. In the next second, the blood-red light suddenly disappeared. Judging from the state of the space being broken and healed, to be more precise, it flew back. Everything returned to its original state. The few changes that happened just now were almost instantaneous. A flash of blood-red in the distant sky was fleeting. In the void, a figure gradually became clear. This was a male half-elf with long purple-green hair, slightly short ears, and a faint green light in his blood-red pupils. Strangely, there were some green leaves growing on one side of the half-elf's shoulders and arms. Lord of Fear, Sasbak! Gabriel's closed eyes slowly opened, flashing a sharp light, and the flames all over his body suddenly intensified. Delothro wasn't being alarmist. He didn't come alone. Now that the second Lord of Fear had appeared, what about the strongest Quiriana? Sasbak touched the left side of his ribs. There was a shocking wound there, and a lot of dark green blood seeped out. It was caused by the reflected arrow from the crimson flame bow. If it wasn't for the fact that the special power of his innate ability had forcibly broken through the power of time acceleration, allowing him to dodge in the nick of time, he definitely wouldn't have suffered such a simple scratch. Power of time? And reflect attacks? Saspak didn't look at Michael and Gabriel, who were full of hatred. He just looked at Chunrui with his burning eyes and said lightly, "Interesting. Although you borrowed the power of the Great Light Sword formation, your strength is obviously stronger than the rest of the minions." Just now, Chunrui not only used the power of time delay of serene, but also Satan's power of time acceleration. The key was that he used the power of mirror body between delay and acceleration, which completely reflected the arrow back to Saspak without giving him a chance to react. Unfortunately, the Lord of Fear was the Lord of Fear after all. Although he was blinded by the power of time, he still exerted the powerful instinctive power and avoided the vital parts. This result was almost unrepeatable because the 10-second time limit of mirror body had been used up. If he wanted to use it again next time, he had to wait for an hour, and Saspak would definitely be prepared. Although the blow just now defeated Saspak, it didn't hurt Saspak. The figure of Delothro, who was trapped in the middle of the Great Light Sword formation, suddenly twisted, disappeared, and then appeared next to Saspak. It turned out that when Saspak shot the arrow just now, Delothro had already seized the opportunity to get rid of the suppression of the Great Light Sword array with an incredible ability, and he also happened to avoid the power of time behind him. Among the three masters of the Abyss, even the weakest one, the Despair Lord, was an extremely dangerous opponent and must not be underestimated. The crystal light of the clock shone again, and incomparably sharp air flew out of the Great Light Sword formation, surrounding the two masters from all directions. This blow had been prepared when Chunrui used the power of time and mirror body, and it was even more powerful than when he besieged Delothro. The bodies of the two juggernauts swayed, and it was as if they had fused into one. The sword chi that filled the sky suddenly came to a standstill the instant they got close. They were densely packed together, but they were unable to advance any further. The hands of the two masters moved in strange trajectories, attracting people's eyes involuntarily. Not only eyes, but also all the aura of life in the space was drawn over. Under the power of this gesture, the crystal of the sword chi became stronger and stronger, and they all solidified into entities. Since they became entities, they lost the mysterious power of formlessness of the sword chi. Shaken by the two fists, they turned into crystal powder and dissipated. In their eyes, the body of the master that seemed to have merged into one was divided into two again, as if it was just an illusion. The cooperation between the two masters of the Abyss was amazing. The powerful blow of the Great Light Sword formation was disintegrated in the blink of an eye. Saspak had already transformed into his Abyss form. His entire body was covered in hideous bone armor and spikes. Although the green leaves on his left shoulder and arm looked a little ridiculous, the horrifying aura he exuded did not make people feel relaxed at all. The air was filled with a suffocating sense of oppression. This master of fear slowly pulled the red flame bow, and the bloody power quickly gathered together, aiming at the Great Light Sword formation. "Be careful," Michael reminded. In the battle of the Holy Mountain of Light, it was Saspak who destroyed the Great Light Sword formation with the red flame bow. The arrow that was reflected just now mainly relied on Chunrui's personal talent. Both Michael and Satan were old opponents of Chunrui, and they knew that this kind of talent couldn't be used repeatedly in a short time. Saspak's arrow was shot in the form of the Abyss, and it was far more powerful than before. Obviously, he was prepared. It was still unknown whether the Great Light Sword formation could resist it, and there was also Delothro who was watching from the side. Surprisingly, before Saspak shot the arrow, Delothro, who was expected to take the opportunity to attack, actually took the initiative to attack and rushed toward the Great Light Sword formation. After all, the Despair Lord just tried to escape from the Great Light Sword formation. Why did he take the initiative to rush in? Was it to buy time for the Fear Lord to brew the power of the Red Flame Bow? Or was it because of something else? No matter what the reason was, De Lazzaro was lucky to escape before, and now he came to him. It was a good time to divide part of the power to trap him in the formation and defeat him, so that he could concentrate on dealing with Sasbach. At this moment, Chenrui was shocked and shouted, "Separate!" This word represented a change in the great light sword formation, which surprised the other four people. Rala reacted the fastest and chose to trust without hesitation. Under the guidance of Rala's power, the rest also launched the change of the sword formation. A special space appeared in the center of the clock, wrapping Chenrui and De Lazzaro in it. From a distance, in the center of the huge clock, there was a transparent ball that represented an independent space. It gradually rose and floated in the air. In the ball were Chenrui and De Lazzaro. In this way, it meant that Chenrui gave up the biggest advantage of the team, left the sword formation, and faced the Despair Lord alone. In the Great Light Sword formation, Michael, Rala, and Gabriel were the three most powerful attack release points. Satan was the central control hub, using the power of the Book of Destruction to control the sword formation and provide the source of power. Chenrui's role was to integrate, control, and increase vitality and the power of faith. It didn't seem very important, but now that he left, the whole sword formation suddenly lost its original operation. The other four people all felt difficult. In this case, how could they compete with the stronger Sasbach? This was clearly a major mistake of using one's weakness to attack the enemy's strength. Satan and Michael frowned at the same time. In the space of the ball, the form of De Lazzaro suddenly changed and turned into Sasbach holding the red flame bow. Everyone suddenly understood. It turned out that the one who rushed over just now was the real Sasbach, and the one who was brewing the red flame bow in the distance was the fake De Lazzaro. This was clearly a conspiracy. If Sasbach was put into the sword formation just now, the Great Light Sword formation would probably be destroyed by the red flame bow from the inside out when it was caught off guard. "How do you know it's me?" Seeing that his strategy was about to succeed and defeat the opponent, Sasbach couldn't help but look surprised when he was seen through. Of course, Chenrui wouldn't answer that it was because of the power of the analytical eyes. His star power quickly increased, and the star armor became more and more dazzling. Sasbach was the second master only after Quiriana, and his strength was far superior to De Lazzaro. Just now, the Great Light Sword formation that the five of them worked together was seized by De Lazzaro to escape. Now that he was facing the stronger Sasbach alone, could he compete with him? "You're not even willing to tell me the answer to the last question in your life?" Sasbach smiled coldly and aimed the red flame bow in his hand at Chenrui. The energy that had been brewing before was suddenly raised to the highest point, and a terrifying blood-red light shot out toward Chenrui at lightning speed. At the moment when De Lazzaro shot this arrow, he saw that Chenrui also had a bow in his hand. It was a green bow, and there was an arrow on the drawn bow. The arrow feather was golden. The arrow flew out, bringing with it a golden light that met the bloody light. The entire space of the ball trembled, and the power of the two lights actually eliminated each other and disappeared at the same time. "Moonlight Cloud Sea Bow!" Sasbach was slightly moved. "You're an elf?" This bow was the first of the three elven bows, the real artifact, Moonlight Cloud Sea Bow. "I'm not an elf," Chenrui replied indifferently, and another arrow was already on the bowstring. His pupils were shining as if there were bright galaxies rotating in his eyes. "Besides, I was too hasty just now. Now I'll show you its real power." During this time, his archery skills had improved by leaps and bounds under the special training of the elves. Coupled with the practice in the training field, he was getting more and more proficient with the Moonlight Cloud Sea Bow. "Stupid minion, it's just some bloodline tricks. Do you really think you can deceive yourself into thinking that you can see the real power of an artifact? Soon, you'll be completely desperate." As Sasbach sneered, his momentum skyrocketed, and the red flame bow became red like a burning flame. The two blood-red lines and the golden lines that divided the space shot out again. There were no tricks, it was the real and absolute power. In the blink of an eye, the two powerful forces collided with each other. After a moment of stalemate, the winner was decided. The crimson thread was cut in half, but the golden thread's momentum did not diminish as it flew straight at Sasbach. Sasbach hurriedly used his crimson flame bow to deflect the golden thread, but a bloody gash was left on his face. Cracks also appeared on the crimson flame bow. "Who the hell are you?" Sasbach was taken aback. The arrow shot by the moonlight cloud bow contained the purest life force and the power of faith. It even exuded the aura of the force of nature. This kind of power was quite close to the power of authority. Chapter 1244. Chinray let go of the taut bowstring. On the green jade-like bow, a golden line broke through the air again. This time, Sasbach didn't dare to underestimate his opponent anymore. He pulled the crimson flame bow, and several blood lines flew out one after another, bombarding the golden line. Finally, the golden line disappeared when it was about 5 meters away from him. Chinray shot 1 arrow, and Sasbach shot 7. It was obvious who had the upper hand. Although Chinray's archery had improved by leaps and bounds under the guidance of the elves, he still couldn't compare to the real elves or half-elves who fused bows and arrows into their lives. Sasbach's half-elf body wasn't simply occupied. It was a kind of fusion. This half-elf named Saul was actually a bloodline descendant of the fallen elves' riot in the Silver Moon Fairy City 20,000 years ago. The Silver Moon Fairy City was a relic of war, and some kind of residual power remained. After losing the suppression of the goddess of moonlight's divine power, the power that was almost exhausted began to slowly recover. The elves' own bloodlines were also affected to a certain extent. Of course, under the power of the Tree of Nature, the influence wasn't obvious. In the fallen elves' riot 20,000 years ago, the Will of Abyss seemed to want to use the Tree of Nature as a medium to open the entrance to the abyss. In fact, there was a more secret backup plan, which was to use the elves' bloodline to create a carrier of the highest ruler when the power of the Tree of Nature declined. The highest ruler referred to the Lord of Hatred, Quiriana, and the choice of the carrier was finally settled on Blanche, who was a half-elf. Blanche's father, Saul, was also chosen by Fear. Although Sasbach's archery was obviously better, he was depressed because he had to shoot 7 arrows to block 1 arrow. That person was clearly not an elf, and he didn't have the elven bloodline like Sasbach did, but he could use the moonlight cloud bow that only the elves' royal descendants could use to such great power. Most terrifying of it all was the energy of life and faith contained within the arrows. It was extremely pure, and it was even to the extent that it faintly approached the realm of authority that only gods were capable of executing. Although he didn't know how his opponent did it, he knew that when he deflected the arrow, the crimson flame bow was already damaged by the restraining force. After that, he continued to fire at high speed and couldn't hold on any longer. Even if the scarlet flame bow was fine, the other party still had the moonlight cloud sea bow in his hands. It was only a matter of time before he was defeated. After this opponent left the great light sword formation, the power of the sword formation had obviously declined, but it was still more powerful than what he had encountered on the holy mountain of light. De Lacero had been suppressed. If this continued, it would be his side that would fail. "I can't fight like this anymore." Staring at the moonlight cloud sea bow, Sasbach's body swayed, and he moved back. The scarlet flame bow in his hand instantly shot out dozens of unprecedented bloodlights, and like a huge claw, it clawed at Chinray. This kind of godly weapon was very fast, leaving very little time for the opponent to react. Chinray frowned as if he was stunned. He didn't immediately counterattack with the moonlight cloud sea bow. He didn't shoot an arrow until the bloodlights approached. The seemingly hasty golden light hit the bloodlights on the far right. At the moment when the two collided, the outline of a human figure appeared in the bloodlight. At the same time, all the bloodlights disappeared. Sorsbach looked at the arrow that had pierced through his right chest. This enemy had once again seen through his best illusion spell. One had to know that even Quiliana couldn't see through this illusion so quickly. If the first time was luck, what about the second time? Bang! The arrow exploded in his chest. Even his body in the state of abyss was seriously injured. Although Sasbak was much stronger than Delothro, his half-elf body didn't have super strong self-healing ability like Delothro's. However, although he was seen through and injured, Sasbak still rushed forward. He only had one purpose of using the illusion: close combat. Chinrei wounded Sasbak with one arrow, but Sasbaka's momentum didn't decrease. Sasbaka's surging momentum locked on Chinrei, and he couldn't shoot a second arrow. In a hurry, a light blue transparent shield appeared around Chinrei, and at the same time, Chinrei wrapped his whole body with the star wings on his back. Sasbak sneered in his heart. This kind of defense was just a last-ditch struggle. Without thinking, he punched at Chinrei. The power of this punch was extremely amazing. The transparent shield immediately cracked, and there seemed to be some kind of bright light flashing inside, trying to maintain the shield. However, it didn't work. After the second punch, the shield completely collapsed, and the remaining force hit the armor like wings. With a tremor, many wings were broken and splashed. Sasbak launched the third punch. He had absolute confidence that this punch would not only completely destroy the enemy's defense but also shatter his body and soul. As long as he killed this person, he could join forces with Delothro to completely defeat the Great Light Sword formation and win this war. Suddenly, the wings spread out, and the purple starlight shone brightly. Sasbaka's movement froze because this punch had been blocked. One hand. The opponent actually used a single hand to receive his fist. While Sasbak was still in shock, a fist shining with starlight had already enlarged in his eyes, and his whole body was suddenly hit by a strong force and flew out. The light figure caught up with Sasbak, who had lost his balance in the air. Bang, bang, bang! In the high-speed punches, Sasbak shouted, and his surging blood energy burst out, shaking off Chinrei, who was chasing him. His figure flashed, and he had begun to counterattack. The two began a fierce fight in the air. Cracks appeared in the space, and the sphere that wrapped the two people in the Great Light Sword formation also seemed to be in danger. Boom! The sphere in the space finally couldn't bear such pressure and collapsed. The two figures suddenly separated and confronted each other in the air. Below, Michael and the others, as well as Delothro, all looked up in surprise. Except for Rala, everyone, including Delothro, was shocked. Sasbak was also shocked. Looking at the scars on his body, his green pupils were full of disbelief. This enemy's strength had reached such a level. Your name? Sasbak's eyes became a bit more serious, and he really began to take this opponent wrapped in starlight seriously. Chinrei. Chinrei said his name. Now his body was so bright that the features on the surface could not be seen clearly, as if he had completely turned into light. After fighting with Quiriana last time, Rala sacrificed herself and merged into the mirror of the gods of heaven, which brought new inspiration to Chinrei. Later, he and the others practiced in the Galaxy Divinity Temple and the training ground for a long time. Although he still couldn't completely integrate everyone into the mirror of the gods of heaven, he had a further understanding of the mystery of the sky, and this light figure was the result of this understanding. In the state of light figure, his strength had reached the level of SSS+++, but this state had a fatal flaw, which was that it couldn't be maintained for long. At present, he could only maintain it for 10 minutes at most, and if he exceeded it, his life would be in danger. From the battle just now, Lucian felt that although they were both at the level of Super 3, his current strength was still slightly inferior to Sasbak. If Sasbak didn't have the hidden danger of the leaf, and was injured by the Moonlight Cloud Sea bow, he might still be at a disadvantage. The time of transformation was limited, and he couldn't maintain it for a long time. With a thought, Chinrei slowly landed in front of the Great Light Sword array and shouted, "Seal!" This word was undoubtedly a code word, just like the previous word, divide. This time, Michael and the others didn't hesitate. The Great Light Sword array changed again, and the glowing Chinrei became the arrow of the whole array. The whole space began to have a special atmosphere, and the whole sky became dark. the sky, the sea, everything merged with the great light sword array as a whole. There seemed to be countless murmurs of prayers in the surroundings, revealing the vast atmosphere of life and faith. It seemed that there was a real universe in front of them, and they were so small. The great light sword array hadn't launched an attack yet, but its momentum was already so terrifying. The next attack would definitely be earth-shattering. The two dominators had an extremely dangerous feeling at the same time. After coming to the main plane, it was the first time that they had such a feeling. They couldn't take this attack. Facing the increasing momentum of the great light sword array, Sasbach and Delothro launched all kinds of attacks, but they couldn't shake the momentum of the universe. Instead, their movements became more and more sluggish, and their strength was rapidly weakening. At this moment, in the void behind them, a blood-red pupil slowly opened, and on the right was a blue pupil. However, it gave people the feeling that the blood-red pupil was the real eye, and the blue pupil was just an empty decoration. The moment this pupil appeared, Sasbach and Delothro only felt that the pressure was greatly reduced. The great light sword array trembled slightly, but its aura didn't weaken. Instead, it was getting stronger step by step. The power had already locked on the eye in the void. It seemed that they had expected this pair of eyes to appear. The eye in the void gradually disappeared, and a girl in a white robe appeared in their sight. Quiriana! The strongest hate Dominus had finally shown himself. Using the Book of Destruction as a medium, gathering all the faith power of the human world? Quiriana saw through the mystery of this power at a glance. She smiled indifferently and said, "There must be a huge inscription array behind you." Quiriana was right. In the far back, a huge ancient inscription array was set up. The island, the sea, and the land were all part of the array. All the fake gods such as Augustus, Palgoris, and Catherine, and most of the demigods were presiding over the most critical part of the array eye. This large array could gather the faith of all the lives in the human world. With the Book of Destruction as the core, it would launch the strongest blow through the great light sword array, intending to destroy the three lords of the abyss. This seal, that Chenrei said just now, was the order to launch the large array. This was the strongest attack of the human world, including the demon realm, and also the last hope. "It's just a trick of a cornered beast," Quiriana said contemptuously. She landed on the sea and walked on the waves step by step. With every step she took, the nearby seawater changed strangely. Islands appeared out of thin air, and the sea turned into land. Feeling some familiar power breath, Chenrei, Michael, and Gabriel blurted out at the same time, "The Book of Creation!" Chapter 1245. A large area of the ocean had become land, and all kinds of plants were growing there. It was not an illusion but a real existence. The vicissitudes of life happened in an instant. This was no longer a miracle but a miracle. However, this miracle of the birth of all things came from the hands of Quiriana, who destroyed everything, which undoubtedly gave people a weird feeling. This was also a kind of impermanence of the world. Looking at the half-elf girl who was burning with the breath of creation, Lucian stepped on the sea step by step. This kind of momentum seemed boundless and unfathomable. It was not integrated into the vast sea and sky, but undisguised above, like the real master overlooking all things in the universe. Chenrei felt a huge pressure, and behind this pressure there was a sense of extreme danger. With every step Quiriana took, the feeling became stronger. The power of the great light sword array, which combined with the super-large inscription circle and the powerful mind power, was also rapidly increasing. The hands of the clock moved slowly, and the feeling of the universe was getting stronger. Sasbach and Delothro had retreated to the back of Quiriana. No matter the outcome of the previous battle, it was negligible. This blow was the real key to the victory. At this time, the hands on the huge clock had turned a circle, and countless prayers gradually merged together. At the moment when the hands returned to the original point, the light of the whole world dimmed. The power of the entire great light sword formation had been filled to the limit. In any case, the arrow on the bow had to be shot. "Sorry, Blanche," Shinrei whispered the name buried in his heart for a long time, and the surging power suddenly burst out. The whole power of heaven and earth gathered into a faint sword light, flying to Quiriana unhurriedly. After this sword light was shot out, the starlight on Shinrei immediately dimmed. The power of the rest of the people, including those in the distant inscription circle, also seemed to be drained. This was the strongest sword that gathered everyone's power. It did not have amazing speed, nor did it have the power to shake the space as imagined. It seemed plain. However, Sasbach and Delasero on the opposite side narrowed their eyes at the same time, and blood overflowed from the corners of their eyes. The two lords of the abyss just glanced at this sword light, and their eyes were stabbed. What kind of power was this? The two hegemons knew in their hearts that even if the two of them joined forces, they wouldn't be able to receive this sword. What about Quiriana, who controlled the Book of Creation? This sword really does have some of the true essence of destruction. World annihilation without splendor, interesting. Quiriana looked at the sword light flying towards her. There was no longer any contempt in her cold eyes. Instead, there was a hint of rare admiration. Unfortunately, I do not exist in the world that you know of. Even if the world is destroyed, I will not be affected. Quiriana did not dodge, because the power contained in this sword could not be avoided at all. Thus, she stretched out her hand. One of his fingers emitted a pure white light, and went up against the sparkling sword light. Everyone was taken aback. Without any transformation, Quiriana actually used one finger to receive this world annihilation without any transformation. The moment her fingers touched the gleam of the sword, Quiriana's pupils constricted slightly. Her long hair fluttered like it was blown by a strong gust of wind. There seemed to be a "ka" sound coming from the bloody pupil of her left eye. Then, an incredible change occurred. The gleam of the sword that contained unparalleled power suddenly became soft. Its form was also rapidly distorting and solidifying. In the end, it turned into a pure white flower. Very beautiful flower. Quiriana gently took down this flower. The flower became more and more translucent in her hand, and finally became a blood-colored crystal flower. Holding this flower of abyss that had completely lost its threat, the pupil of the half-elf's left eye became more and more blood-red. The corner of her mouth curved into an evil smile, which looked beautiful and enchanting. The people on Shinrei's side were stunned. They could hardly believe what they saw. They had deliberately used the geographical advantage to set up the big formation, just to fight to the death with the three lords of the abyss. Unexpectedly, the desperate final sword was so easily resolved by Quiriana. Wasn't this a complete declaration of the defeat of the human side? The Book of Creation! Michael looked at the white light on Quiriana's fingertips in a daze, and his body trembled slightly. That's right. It must be the power of the Book of Creation that could make that unparalleled sword just now have such an incredible change. According to his understanding, his side had the power of the Book of Destruction. When it came into contact with the power of creation, it would superimpose an even higher amount of amazing destruction. However, for some reason, such an unimaginable change had occurred. Michael and Gabriel looked at each other, and a thought came to their minds at the same time. The Book of Creation can be used like this. The three supreme angels had held the Book of Creation for so many years, but they could not understand its power no matter how hard they tried. They could only use it to steal and transform part of the faith. However, when the Book of Creation was in the hands of Quiriana, it could actually have such a wonderful use. Shinrei reacted the fastest, and once again quickly condensed the power of the great light sword formation. Although the power of the Book of Creation was amazing, Quiriana's strength had not reached the god level yet. Using the Book of Creation to block that sword just now actually consumed a lot of power, and it was not as easy as it looked. He had to continue attacking before she fully recovered to have a chance of survival. Quiriana smiled coldly, and a violent blood aura rose from her body. Her snow-white skin instantly turned blood-red, and dark golden patterns faintly appeared. Very soon, sharp bone spikes grew out of her shoulders and arms, and the blood-red robe turned into dark golden armor. A tail appeared behind her. In the blink of an eye, she had already displayed 2 transformations. Under the terrifying aura, the sky and the sea were dyed blood red in the trembling. A long whip appeared in her hand, and it slashed through the air towards Chenrui with a sharp, blood-colored force that tore through the air. "Block!" Chenrui immediately shouted. At this moment, the 4 people behind him also reacted. Their hand gestures changed, and the sword aura turned into a barrier-like protective force. The blood-colored whip lashed on the barrier, and the great light sword formation trembled violently. Cracks appeared faintly on the huge clock, but fortunately, it managed to withstand the attack. Chenrui's guess was right. Quiriana was indeed unable to continuously use the Book of Creation within a short period of time. However, there was not much power left in the great light sword formation now. This whip was performed at the strongest state of Quiriana's double transformation. If it was not for the profoundness of the sword formation, it would have collapsed under this attack. Quiriana laughed coldly, and the long whip once again lashed out layers of whip shadows that were like mountains, not giving Chenrui and the rest any time to catch their breath. "Turn!" Chenrui's voice sounded, and the light figure waved out circles of gentle ripples. The whip power hit the sword formation and was actually rippled. Finally, all the whip shadows merged into one, and flew in the opposite direction of Quiriana. This was not mirror body, but star diversion, the power of star diversion that was released by the great light sword formation. Quiriana was slightly surprised, and her long whip lashed out to meet the reflected whip power. In the muffled sound, the 2 forces cancelled each other out. At this moment, a sharp sword aura passed through the gap between the whip, breaking through the air like a bolt of lightning. Quiriana could no longer retract the long whip that she had lashed out. Her body suddenly tilted to the side, and the claws of her left hand grabbed at the same time. She actually caught the sword aura with her bare hands, but there was already a trace of blood on her cheek from the sword aura. Without waiting for Quiriana to make the next reaction, the sharp sword aura came one after another, like the endless Yangtze River. Everyone unreservedly displayed their remaining strength. This was their last hope. If they could not take advantage of this opportunity to eliminate Quiriana, then everyone present, including the people of the entire world, would face complete destruction. The sword aura that filled the sky suddenly paused, and was instantly dyed blood red by some kind of power. In the next second, a circle of blood light rippled out, and all the sword aura actually shattered, revealing the despairing figure within. There were many sword scars on Quiriana's face and body. The bloody pupil in her left eye revealed a ruthless look, and the originally faint crack in her pupil became increasingly clear. The long whip in her hand suddenly turned into a shining white, like a waterfall, and directly pierced through. Everyone in the great light sword formation felt a sense of danger that made their blood run cold. The power of creation. Quiriana had used the Book of Creation again so quickly. This whip merged with the Book of Creation, and was different from the previous transformation that turned the sword aura into a flower. This was a pure and direct attack. The most terrifying thing was that the resonance caused by the Book of Creation and the Book of Destruction would cause damage that was several times greater. Now that there was no way to dodge, they could only face the attack with all their might. At the moment when the 2 forces collided, time seemed to stop, and then everything in the space was covered by the dazzling light. The seawater, islands, and creatures within the white light were instantly turned into nothingness. The entire white sea shook violently, and a large area of the coastline, including many military buildings, collapsed and disintegrated in an instant. This violent tremor spread all the way to the western continent, and everyone felt the great tremor in the world in horror. After a long time, the terrifying tremor slowly stopped. At the center of the tremor, the originally surging ocean had unbelievably solidified into a strange crystalline solid, showing traces of a huge explosion. Quiriana stood on the solidified ground. In front of her was a long drag mark, and there was also a radial arc mark, which was obviously left by some kind of protective force. The whip in her hand was only left with an empty whip handle, and the dark golden armor on her body was also faintly cracked. Behind her stood Sasbach and Delothro, who were even more disheveled. The faces of these two rulers were still filled with shock from the explosion just now. The abyss had destroyed countless planes, but it was the first time they had encountered such a terrifying force. On the opposite side of the three rulers of the abyss, the great light sword formation had completely collapsed. Except for Chun-Rui, who could barely stand, the other four were all seriously injured and couldn't get up. Michael's right arm was gone, and so was his Holy Cross sword. Gabriel's wings were all broken, and the Holy Melody sword in her hand was broken into 2 pieces. Satan looked fine on the surface, but he was the most seriously injured one. If it wasn't for the protection of the Book of Destruction, his soul would have been annihilated under this violent shock. Rala was at the back of the formation. She was relatively less injured, but she almost completely lost the ability to fight. The winner of this battle was the Abyss. If it wasn't for the Book of Creation, maybe this result would be reversed, but since it had become the result, if was meaningless. Chun-Rui, who was at the front, suffered the most violent impact. If it wasn't for the power of the mirror of the gods of the sky, he would have been annihilated. Even so, his soul and body were seriously injured, and he had little power left. Your strength has surpassed Delothro. Kuriana looked indifferently at Chun-Rui, who was covered in dim starlight. I'll give you a chance. Offer your soul and accept the will of despair. You will become the new master of despair. Chun-Rui was a little surprised. He looked at the master of despair behind Kuriana and found that Delothro didn't have any special reaction. Instead, he showed a strange smile. Chun-Rui frowned, showed a thoughtful look, and asked, If I accept the will of the Abyss, will I completely lose myself? If it's that kind of walking dead, I'd rather choose to be completely annihilated. You won't completely lose yourself. It's just a kind of fusion. For example, in my will, there are still memories about your past, which belong to her. Quiriana's right blue eye became a little more solid, and the emptiness was weakened a lot. Chun-Rui took a deep look at Quiriana. Although her appearance looked ferocious, she gave him the feeling of the half-elf who silently liked him. As long as you accept the will of the Abyss, you can feel that kind of vastness and greatness, just like the supreme truth of the universe. A cloud of blood-red mist appeared in Quiriana's hand. This is your last way to survive. Chun-Rui was silent for a moment. He converged all the power in his body and walked toward Quiriana step by step. When he came to the front, Chun-Rui didn't make a move. Instead, he reached out to the mist. The people behind looked at each other. Did he really choose to surrender to survive? Only Rala didn't have doubt in her eyes, only worry. Both Sosbak and Delothro's eyes fell on Chun-Rui's hand, but they didn't notice that a circle of golden light appeared on the ground under their feet. Chun-Rui's hand suddenly froze in the air. With a cold snort from Quiriana, Chun-Rui's body flew backward and fell on the ground far away. Space artifact? Where do you want to take us? Quiriana looked at the surrounding ground with a hint of ridicule. She suddenly squeezed her hand that was holding the mist, and a layer of transparent glass-like thing in the surrounding space shattered. Chun-Rui's face turned pale. He seemed to have suffered some backfire, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His original intention was to use the Tower of Brilliance and the Stargate to take Quiriana and the other two to the UFO land by surprise and destroy Quiriana by imitating the way he dealt with Charlie last time. He didn't expect that he would be seen through as soon as he used the Tower of Brilliance. Ignorant guy, the will of the Abyss has come to the main plane. Even if you have the ability to take me to a forbidden place like the Graveyard of the Gods, I can still return freely. Quiriana seemed to see through Chun-Rui's plan and said. Chun-Rui's heart suddenly sank. With Quiriana's current strength and absolute victory, there was no need to boast. It seemed that even if he succeeded just now, he couldn't really defeat the opponent. Then, there was only one thing left. To use this thing, not only must one have the awareness of destroying oneself, but also must have the courage to bear the destruction of everything. Lucifer's card. Chapter 1246. Since you've chosen death, then I shall grant you death. Quiriana didn't look at Chun-Rui anymore. Just as she was about to attack, she suddenly looked at Satan, who was slowly standing up behind her. She frowned. Satan's body was now surrounded by a faint red mist. Dangerous energy was gathering at a high speed. You want to use the descendants of God's blood to trigger the Book of Destruction? Unfortunately, your descendants of God's blood is too thin. Even if you burn all of it, it won't help. Quiriana saw through Satan's intentions with a look of disdain. In front of the power I possess, mutual destruction is just an ignorant delusion. With that, a white ball of light appeared in Quiriana's hand. It was the Book of Creation. She waved at Satan from afar. Satan felt his mind tremble. The crazily burning blood power suddenly froze. At the same time, the Book of Destruction, which had been fused with his soul, seemed to be pulled by something and started to break out of his body. Suddenly, the pulling force disappeared. To be more precise, the flow of time sped up. The accelerated time blocked Quiriana's power. It meant that the power had disappeared before it reached its target. The explosion of the Book of Destruction also sped up. This was the power of time that Satan was best at. In the vast universe, time is just one of the elements. Plus, it's just a little trick like yours. Quiriana shook her head in disdain. Her claw holding the white ball of light spun around casually. Everyone felt their minds shake. Everything that had just happened flowed back. This wasn't the power of time. It was a pure power that made the acceleration of time completely ineffective. The power of time that Satan controlled was even more ingenious than Shenrui's. However, against such absolute power, even the most exquisite technique was useless. Bang, bang, bang. Dull explosions came from Satan's body. His blood vessels seemed to explode. A ball of dark light left his body and slowly flew towards Quiriana. The Book of Destruction was pulled out without any suspense. At this time, the power of the Book of Destruction and the Book of Creation suddenly stopped. They actually broke away from Quiriana's control. They slowly rose and floated in the air, facing each other. They emitted strange waves. The two waves intertwined and produced some kind of strong resonance. Under this resonance, everyone, including Quiriana, felt as if their movements were being restrained by some kind of great power, becoming sluggish. And the center of the resonance was Shenrui. Quiriana was shocked. Her gaze fell on something in Shenrui's hand. She took a closer look and saw that it was a card. From this angle, she could see the picture on the back of the card. It was a special thing, like a key. This resonance. Quiriana's pupils suddenly shrank. Her voice was strangely trembling as she blurted out. Could it be it? It must be! Quiriana's expression was no longer cold and indifferent. A strange light burned in her eyes. I didn't expect the Book of Life and Death to be with you. No, it's the key to open the seal of life and death. At that moment, Shenrui suddenly understood. The Book of Life and Death. The seventh silver box. According to legend, the Creator used 7 days to create this world. 3 days to destroy everything that was originally unsuitable for life, and then 3 days to create this universe with the main plane as the center. In the 6 silver boxes, there were 3 pages of the Book of Creation and 3 pages of the Book of Destruction. But it only added up to 6 days. Nothingness was the beginning of heaven and earth. Being was the mother of all things. Between nothingness and being, there was the most powerful and most mysterious day. On this day, the 7th silver box that surpassed creation and destruction was created. It was also what Ben Hong called the most forbidden power. Life and death, or life and death, creation and destruction, being and nothingness. Creation and destruction alone could not form a complete universe. The cycle of life and death was the core truth of the universe. The supreme key formed by the 7 artifacts was the key to open the seal of this silver box. The eye that destroyed the gods in the void was the Book of Life and Death? Something was not right. In the dream caused by the power of Lucifer and the tree of nature, the eye was an existence besieged by the gods. And the seal that Quiriana mentioned. No. Gabriel's voice sounded. Don't use it. What are you hesitating about? Quiriana showed a strange smile, and her voice was tempting. As long as you use the Supreme Key, you can open the power of the Book of Life and Death. Even if I hold the Book of Creation. No, I still have the Book of Destruction, I can't resist it. You can completely destroy the abyss. Shinrui felt his breathing quicken, and he subconsciously clenched the Lord of Darkness in his hand. Lucifer's words seemed to ring in his ears again. There was only one chance to use the Supreme Key. Not only must he have the awareness of destroying himself, but he must also have the courage to bear the destruction of everything. However, in the current situation, if he didn't use it, the abyss would also destroy everything. Just as Shinrui made up his mind and planned to use the Supreme Key, several beams of light shot from a distance like lightning. It was actually the main cannon of the Starlight. Psychic. In the previous battle, as a precaution, Shinrui had given orders to Crystal Phoenix early in the morning to store all the human and demons fleets and armies into the Starlight. In that big explosion, the Starlight suffered a strong impact. If it weren't for the distance and the protection of the Rule Energy Shield, it would have collapsed long ago. However, these attacks were not launched under Shinrui's orders. To do this, one must have sufficient authority, and only his closest women and friends had it. Although the light of Psychic was extremely fast, it slowed down under the power of resonance when it entered this area. The targets of these beams were actually Shinrui, Gabriel, Satan, Michael, and Rala. Shinrui already understood the purpose of the beam shooting because Psychic had the special function of teleportation. This teleportation could not only be sent out, but it could also be retracted. However, even if they escaped back to the Starlight, they wouldn't be able to escape the pursuit of a powerhouse like Quiriana. While he was hesitating, a long-lost familiar voice sounded in Shinrui's mind. The hand holding the cards trembled, and he involuntarily listened to the voice and put away the cards. Everyone felt that the binding force suddenly disappeared. At the same time, the light of Psychic also hit the 5 people. However, this time, there were not 5 light beams, but 6. The target of the 6th light beam was the suspended Book of Destruction and Book of Creation. Quiriana's reaction was extremely fast. After discovering the intention of this light beam, her figure flashed, and she had already rushed into the sky. Although she was a little slower than the light beam because she got rid of the binding, Quiriana had absolute confidence that she could instantly turn this guy who dared to play tricks in front of her into ashes, and then catch up with Shinrui and the others. Unsurprisingly, Quiriana's hand accurately grabbed that person's neck. On that beautiful face, there was no pain, only indifference. Quiriana's expression suddenly changed. This was because the Book of Destruction and Book of Creation emitted a strong light at the same time, and an extremely dangerous feeling surged in her heart. This woman! At the moment when the basic Book of Creation and Book of Destruction collided, she used the power that she had long prepared to trigger the interweaving of the origin of creation and origin of destruction. The interweaving of the 2 types of books was not ingenious, but pure mixing. This kind of mixing would produce an indescribable explosive power. It was far more powerful than the whip she used to deal with the Great Light Sword formation. This woman's power was actually the origin of creation and origin of destruction. Although it was not very strong, it was like a fuse, triggering the most terrifying explosion. Quiriana let go of this woman without hesitation, and immediately grabbed the Book of Destruction and Book of Creation. However, it was too late, and the terrifying power exploded in an instant. The speed of light was extremely fast, and this series of changes actually happened in the blink of an eye. The Starlight had been set to jump at full speed in advance, but it still suffered a terrifying shockwave from this explosion. Although it was severely damaged, this shockwave also helped the Starlight to a certain extent, allowing the Starlight to successfully escape to a safe area before it was destroyed. A second before the explosion, Shinrui happened to be teleported back to the Starlight by the light. He felt as if his chest was blocked by something, and then his 5 senses seemed to have lost their function. He could not even feel the violent tremors of the Starlight space in the explosion. All that was left in his mind was the last white light that rushed towards the Book of Creation and Book of Destruction. The people of the Western continent once again encountered a strong shock. This time, the intensity was 10 times more intense than the last time. The land cracked, and buildings collapsed one after another like an earthquake. The cities along the coast were even directly destroyed. In the starlight, the vibration caused by the explosion had gradually stopped. Judging from the current situation of the space, the damage caused this time was definitely not light. The team of spiritual monsters had begun to disperse, quickly counting the losses and repairing the equipment. Shinrei! The voices of Catherine and others finally woke Shinrei up. Under the powerful shock of Quiriana's whip, many weaker people in the inscription array behind were annihilated on the spot. Catherine, Isabella, and others were also seriously injured. It was the woman who disappeared for a long time who rescued the survivors with the starlight. Where is she now? Shinrei clenched his fists. Regardless of the loss of the starlight, he ordered Crystal Phoenix to immediately return to the previous jump coordinates. Soon after, the battered starlight finally returned to the White Sea battlefield. Shinrei was the first to fly off the starlight, and Michael and others followed behind. If the first explosion completely changed the appearance of the ocean, then the second explosion completely destroyed the entire White Sea. The three masters of the abyss, the Book of Creation, and the Book of Destruction were all gone. In the center of the explosion, there was only one figure standing alone on the twisted ground. Looking closely, the figure gave an ethereal feeling. There was a faint colorful smoke scattered around the body as if it would dissipate at any time. Shinrei walked toward the figure quickly. The moment he touched the smoke, Shinrei was shocked as if he felt some kind of soul memory. A scene appeared in his mind. In his sight was the back of a tall and thin man. He couldn't see his face clearly, but he could only see his snow-white wings. "Have you really decided? This path?" she asked. "I will not succumb to the so-called fate." The man didn't look back. "Whether it's a mistake or a misunderstanding, it doesn't matter. The key is to go down the path that I have decided on. Similarly, I will bear the consequences myself. Because this is my choice." As the man spoke, he gradually walked into the darkness. Some of his wings seemed to be dyed black. Watching the man go away, she looked at the wings behind her and said in a low voice, "This is my choice." Then, she followed the figure that stepped into the darkness.